The story begins when humanity finally emerged victorious. A warrior sat amidst the rubble of a destroyed city, panting from sheer exhaustion after a decisive battle, lost in contemplation of the price paid for this win. The battle had been against the 6 great demon gods, who sought to destroy the entire world. The heroes managed to crush them all and eliminate them, down to the last one, the demon god who had turned the oceans into deadly seas. But the price was devastating. The sea of death left behind by that god had swallowed most of the land, including cities and civilizations. With this victory, humanity itself stood on the brink of extinction, prompting the last warrior to let out a curse full of despair as he looked at the magnitude of the loss. He wondered deep within himself about the point of this victory, which in reality felt like a crushing defeat, for everything around him was ruins extending to infinity. None of the surviving heroes remained, and even the Tower of Heroes, which was once a symbol of the Earth's resilience, had collapsed and turned into rubble. He looked bitterly at the destroyed sea that would not disappear even after its creator's death, before being interrupted by a mocking voice accusing him of making a pointless fuss. The speaker was Yom Song-ha, nicknamed the Mad Dog, who mocked him, saying that anyone seeing him would think he had accomplished everything on his own. They were joined by Louise Vallant, nicknamed the Explosive Bitch, who replied to Song-ha sarcastically, describing him as a chatterbox who had been claiming to be sick just a moment ago. Then Amir Singh, known as the Ice Dog, intervened, adding that their leader was nothing but an opportunist who wanted to take all the credit for himself. The last blacksmith, Lee Se-hoon, shot back at them, reminding them that they wouldn't have lasted a single moment if not for the gear he had crafted for them with his own fingers. His words provoked his 3 companions, who looked at him with anger and disapproval. Se-hoon told them to shut up. These 3 were known as the 3 Dogs. They were never on the side of humanity nor on the side of the demons, but rather moved according to their whims and pursued their personal interests. They were a group of selfish opportunists. But despite that, they managed to survive until the end, and their contribution to the final battle was the greatest. Se-hoon reflected on their fate, wondering if the outcome would have been different if these 3 had offered their strength earlier. Then he asked them a direct question about whether any of them would survive this battle. Song-ha was the first to answer, confirming that his internal organs had been completely crushed and that his end was near. Louise confirmed she was in the same position, as she was struck by a curse that prevented her bleeding from stopping, while Amir added that his heart had been pierced and his death was also inevitable. Se-hoon looked at them with reproach and sorrow, explaining that this was the penalty for their hesitation and delay in helping. He scolded them for their selfishness that stayed with them until their last breath, as they thought of no one but themselves. Suddenly, the 3 fell before him as lifeless corpses after exhaling their final breaths. Se-hoon sighed sadly as he saw them, admitting they were a burden and a source of annoyance until the end. With heavy steps, he began gathering their weapons from the ground. He repaired them for the last time, and thrust their weapons into the ground, asking them to take care of them this time, given his inability to use them after they were gone, considering that they would be fitting tombstones for them at the very least. He stood alone before a massive wave heading toward him, wondering in the end if his time to depart had also come. Se-hoon decided in his final moments that this would be the last time he would do this. Suddenly, he placed his hand on his chest, and blue sparks erupted between them as a digital window appeared before him, announcing the start of Extracting Fate from Target, Lee Se-hoon. He was using his ability on himself. The energy condensed to form a glowing diamond crystal in his hand, and another message appeared indicating that the link with the creator, Lee Se-hoon, had reached a certain level. This was his unique ability, link extraction. It was an innate skill that enabled him, as a link smith, to extract special ores from targets he had formed a link with, where the effect of the ore changes based on the strength of the link and the target's potential. But he knew that using this ability on himself produced nothing but something worse than ordinary iron ore, as the stone extracted from him was a colorless ore, completely empty of any power, making him regret not awakening this skill earlier. He contemplated the valueless stone in his hand and decided that if it contained nothing at all, then at the very least, let it take with it the regret wringing his heart. He raised his hammer high, determined to use it to forge one last weapon. At that moment, the sound of roaring waves echoed in his ears, and he wondered if this was the sound of the destroyed sea or the sound of the waves he had heard his whole life. He was certain of one thing. Whenever this sound rang in his ears, tools beyond imagination were crafted by his hands. He struck the stone with his hammer with all the strength he could muster, and a bright light exploded, filling the place. When the light cleared, he found that the stone had turned into a small dagger, and he smiled ironically, realizing that his abilities carried no special power until the end, even though he had hoped something special would emerge from his own link stone. He raised the ordinary dagger in the air, expressing his disappointment at its extreme simplicity. He decided to end his life with his own hands, rather than die drowning in the waves of that cursed sea. As he sank into the depths, he laughed at himself, describing it as madness. For the last act he performed in his life was striking with his hammer. He realized in his final moments, as he forged that dagger, the truth of the matter. The sound of the waves he had been hearing since his power awakened was none other than the sound of the destroyed sea. He had long wondered about its source, and only now did he know the truth. A sense of regret overwhelmed him as he drowned, thinking that if he had realized sooner, or if he had convinced those 3 dogs to join them earlier. No, rather, if he had used his hammer to help others even a little, perhaps many things would have changed. Suddenly a window appeared before him announcing that the gear image has manifested. This was followed by another notification stating that a pictorial skill called Return to Origin had been triggered. He suddenly found himself in a bright place, wondering in confusion how he was still alive, before a strange voice called out to the apprentice, Lee Se-hoon, asking what he was doing at that moment. The angry voice interrupted him again, scolding him for being distracted during the entrance exam. Se-hoon hadn't heard the word apprentice in 31 years, and he was struck with astonishment at the mention of the entrance exam. He connected the events. If it was about 31 years ago, this meant he was in the entrance exam for the Tower of Babel. He looked around to see a blacksmith workshop full of young people, which led him to wonder if his life was passing before his eyes. But he stopped when he remembered the system window that showed the dagger he had forged just before his death, realizing that this was the pictorial manifestation he had seen in his final moments. He wondered if the return to origin had actually happened thanks to that dagger before receiving a final warning from the supervisor. The supervisor threatened him with expulsion if he didn't take the exam seriously this time, and Se-hoon answered distractedly, confirming his agreement. He looked at the hammer in his hand and muttered to himself, grasping the reality of his time travel. He began to wonder if he would be able to change everything if he had realized his abilities early and used his hammer sooner. But he quickly shook this idea out of his head and gripped his hammer firmly, realizing there was something more important than that. Now, Se-hoon realized that only one thing mattered now, the necessity of seizing the opportunity he had been given. Therefore, he resolved to protect everything this time, making a vow to himself. He decided that in this life, he would enter the Tower of Babel, no matter the cost. Meeting the 3 dogs would be the starting point to achieve his goal. He grabbed his hammer and began working with a seriousness that caught the attention of the supervisor watching him. The supervisor wondered to himself about the identity of this interesting apprentice. His hammering skill was amazing. Although his strikes seemed slow, they were rhythmic and regular, producing a clear ring free of any flaw. The supervisor concluded that his blacksmithing skills were top tier. His work sparked astonishment among the other apprentices who wondered about the level of mastery he had reached, while Se-hoon held a polished and perfect blade. The assistant couldn't believe what he was seeing, while the supervisor thought that an exceptional apprentice had applied for the test this year. The supervisor was certain that if he submitted this work as it was, he would pass the test immediately, but he was surprised by Se-hoon raising his hammer high, intending to shatter the blade he had forged. In an instant, the blade shattered into fragments, leaving the supervisor and his assistant in total shock. Although he knew he had a long way to go, he felt that submitting such garbage was something he could never accept as a true blacksmith. Assistant Han shouted in his face, denouncing his act of shattering his weapon in front of the master and considering it a mockery of the exam, but Se-hoon ignored him and called out to the supervisor directly. Then he announced his desire to reforge his task from scratch. Assistant Han tried to interrupt him angrily, but the supervisor cut him off calmly, calling him by his name. He ordered his assistant Han to bring Se-hoon the remaining materials, which sparked the assistant's surprise. With a sharp look, the supervisor asked him if there was anything in the rules preventing that, or if he should go get them himself. The assistant became flustered and replied in the negative. The assistant rushed off to get the materials, while the supervisor turned his conversation to the young man. The supervisor reminded him that the remaining time for the exam was only 40 minutes, and Se-hoon acknowledged his knowledge of that. Then he asked him if he still believed that shattering his work was the right decision. Se-hoon answered firmly that he could not submit something at that level. The supervisor smiled with admiration and told him to do his best. Se-hoon realized that reaching perfect blacksmithing would be difficult with his current body. He lacked mana, strength, and even time. Therefore, he had to find the optimal choice in this situation. Suddenly, one of the apprentices heard a strange sound coming from Se-hoon's direction. The apprentice noticed that Se-hoon was pouring mana energy into the ignition stone and shouted, warning him that the stone would explode if it caught fire. But Se-hoon paid no heed to the warning. Instead, he broke parts of the stone and placed them directly into the fire, sparking terror among the other apprentices who thought he had gone mad. In the next moment, a multicolored flame erupted from his forge. Chaos ensued, and apprentices began shouting for a fire extinguisher. Assistant Han rushed toward the supervisor, shouting about the need to extinguish the fire, but the supervisor stopped him calmly, warning him that he shouldn't act in panic, even if the apprentices were panicking. The supervisor asked his assistant Han to watch the flow of the flame closely, but the assistant seemed confused and surprised by this request. It was the 5-color fire furnace technique, a high-temperature flame enhanced by manipulating 5 different types of ignition stones simultaneously. Although this technique requires extremely precise control over mana energy, it was considered an excellent method that could be used with a very small amount of mana, which Se-hoon mastered brilliantly. The other apprentices were stunned, wondering why the forge didn't explode, before they noticed something even stranger. The color of the iron alloy itself began to change under the influence of that multicolored flame. The supervisor then realized Se-hoon's plan. He had synchronized the ignition stones to enhance the heat and change the properties of the iron alloy itself. The supervisor concluded that this method would significantly reduce the forging time, but he remained skeptical. With only 30 minutes left, the time was still extremely tight. Although his previous forging was excellent, the supervisor believed he wouldn't be able to finish his work in time if this was all he had up his sleeve. But Se-hoon continued his work with absolute focus, unbothered by the doubts of others. He hammered the glowing metal with brilliance and precision, shaping the sword blade amidst the colored flames. Suddenly, the protection layer vanished from his arm after his mana energy ran out, leaving him disappointed in his weak body, and he resolved to start his training as soon as this test ended. Nonetheless, he didn't allow himself to waste a single second. He continued hammering with all his strength, pushing his body to its absolute limits to complete his task. Time passed quickly. 10 minutes, then 3, then 1 minute remaining. Se-hoon finished polishing the blade at the very last moment when the allotted time for the exam was announced to be over. He was panting from exhaustion before a window appeared before him announcing the completion of the 5-color fire sword weapon and that he had acquired the flame artisan skill. The evaluation results showed that the sword's rank was high quality, a sword infused with 5 types of flames that interact with mana to show different colors, and the blade's properties change according to the nature of the mana used. The other apprentices couldn't believe what they heard, and one of them repeated in shock that the weapon's rank was high quality. Se-hoon calmly asked Assistant Han to check the information window to verify the details, which increased the assistant's shock, while the supervisor smiled, realizing that what he was seeing before him was a legendary work by all standards. Assistant Han shouted loudly announcing his success, so the supervisor scolded him for his loud voice, prompting the assistant to apologize in embarrassment. Later, in Professor Kim In-cheol's office, the supervisor met with Se-hoon. The supervisor asked him if this sword was worth submitting this time. Se-hoon answered hesitantly that it was, for the time being, and the supervisor noticed he was still not completely satisfied with his work. The supervisor decided to speak with him frankly, telling him that this place wouldn't be enough for his talent, and advised him to withdraw his application. He explained to him that the Tower of Babel enjoys a great reputation, but the smelting department specifically hadn't achieved any notable results for a long time. This was a fact Se-hoon already knew. He knew from the future that the smelting department in Babel would close within 8 years due to the deterioration of its standards, and that the best institution for teaching blacksmithing in the future would be Vulcan Academy. Se-hoon interrupted the supervisor's thoughts, who was about to mention Vulcan, telling him he was wrong. Then he announced with absolute confidence that the best wouldn't be Vulcan, but would be Babel, because he himself would join it. Se-hoon confirmed to the professor that he was wrong. He repeated confidently that the best place for blacksmithing wouldn't be Vulcan, but Babel, because it is the place he will join. The professor looked at him with astonishment, then added that if that were the case, he must guarantee the first place in his department first, and asked if he was confident in his ability to achieve that. Se-hoon answered in the affirmative, of course, justifying his confidence by saying that no other student was better than him. The professor asked him if he was aware of the process of choosing the best freshman student in the department at Babel Academy. Se-hoon answered that he knew the best 2 students in each specialization take an additional exam to determine one candidate, and from among those qualifiers, the best freshman in the entire department is chosen. Babel Academy is generally divided into 3 main departments. They are the combat department, the support department, and the technical department. Each of these departments includes dozens of specializations intertwined like roots. As for the title of Best Freshman, it is awarded to the individual who receives overwhelmingly superior evaluations in all these countless specializations and is considered an absolute talent recognized by the entire academy. The professor sighed, then decided to tell him something for the last time, not as his professor, but as a blacksmith older than him. He told him that even if he managed to get first place in the department, he would find extreme difficulty in achieving success as a blacksmith here, and advised him once again to go to Vulcan Academy. And he confirmed to him that this was the best path for his future. Sehun smiled to himself, realizing that the professor placed his student's future above his personal status, and considered him a truly good man. Then he replied to him saying that the environment doesn't matter, and as he mentioned before, the Babel he joins will soon become the best. The professor muttered to himself ironically, wondering if he would become the best wherever he went. It was a statement that went beyond mere vanity to reach pure arrogance. The professor extended his hand to shake his, expressing his looking forward to working with him. Sehun shook it enthusiastically, saying he looked forward to working with him too, and at that moment, a window appeared announcing the creation of a link with the target Kim In-cheol, and that the link level with the creator Lee Si-hoon had reached level 1. Si-hoon immediately seized the opportunity and performed a link extraction from the target Kim In-cheol. A unique piece of metal appeared in his hand. It was fire-infused iron, a high-rank metal that carries the properties of wood and can store fire within it. Later in his room, Sehun was checking his stats and reflecting on what had happened. The piece of metal he had obtained wasn't bad, but its size was extremely small. He thought about his ability link extraction, that skill that embodies his relationship with a specific target and extracts minerals that didn't exist before. The only problem was that the link level was still too low to utilize it properly. Additionally, his stats were extremely weak compared to the rest of the freshmen in Babel. He sighed, realizing that the situation was unfortunate in several ways, but he considered this the price of returning to the past, and that in truth he had survived at a bargain price. He decided not to rush. Expecting more than that now would be greed, and he still had plenty of time to destroy the scum of Pandemonium. Pandemonium were monsters that threatened not only humanity but the entire planet. Even the 6 great demon gods who pushed humanity to the brink of extinction were all part of their plan. He decided that to stop them, he must not hesitate to use any necessary means. He realized he couldn't risk his memories of key future events becoming hazy, so his priority now was to find an artifact or a skill related to memory to preserve this precious knowledge. While his goal was clear, he realized that the first step of his plan, enrolling in Babel Academy, was already complete. As he thought about his next move, a sudden notification appeared before him. It announced that user Lee Si-hoon's link level had reached level 1. As a result, a new skill called Link Imprint was added to him. A week later at Babel Academy, the atmosphere was solemn. Sehun was walking in one of the hallways looking confused, wondering if he had lost his way again. Finally, he found his destination, Smelting Room number 3. As soon as he opened the door to start giving his greetings, a voice interrupted him, calling his full name, Apprentice Lee Si-hoon. Inside the room, Sehun noticed that his opponent in the exam was already present, while a blonde-haired man looked at him with dissatisfaction and commented that he seemed far too relaxed. This man was Michael Barmit-Weiss, the vice dean of the Perspa department, who scolded him sharply, wondering if he didn't see that everyone was waiting for him. Professor Kim In-cheol intervened calmly, reminding the vice dean that there were still 10 minutes left before the start of the supplementary exam. The vice dean replied sharply that the issue wasn't a matter of time, but a matter of behavior. He told Professor Kim that he would take it upon himself to warn Sehun. Sehun realized through this dialogue that the smelting department wasn't just suffering from difficulties, but that the professor himself was at odds with the senior administration. Only now did Sehun understand the reason for the professor's advice for him to join a different academy. And he started to welcome the other person, but his words were suddenly cut off when the other person turned his face, sparking Sehun's confusion as he felt he had seen him before. The door opened for a woman who appeared confident to enter, asking if everyone had already gathered. Michael Barmit-Weiss welcomed the newcomer, addressing her as Dean, and expressing that he was wondering when she would arrive. But Sehun's surprise was greater, as he recognized that woman's identity. She was Ryu Eun-ha, the dean of the Perseba department at Babel Academy, who apologized for being late. Terror seized Sehun, who couldn't process what he was seeing, wondering in shock why she was here. He had heard she worked at Babel for a while, but he never expected her to be the dean. Ryu Eun-ha was an S-rank hero known as the Weapon Eater, a hero possessing a unique skill that enabled her to amplify her strength by consuming weapons. In his previous life, she was a regular customer who had been dealing with him for a long time, but his most vivid memory of her was from a tragic scene under the rain, where she was dying as she confessed to him her regret for consuming his weapon. That painful memory was still etched in his mind. Professor Kim's voice brought him back to reality as he called him by his name, and he answered in confusion. "Ah, yes." Professor Kim announced that he would now begin explaining the details of the exam, asking them to pay attention. clarifying that the total duration of the exam was 90 minutes. During this time, the competitors had to create a weapon that could be used side by side with the sword that was the subject of their previous exam. But the professor added a crucial condition. They must forge the gear using chemical smelting only, and he illustrated his point by lighting a fireball in his hand. As for the materials, he pointed to a pile of diverse ores and told them they had total freedom to use any of them. The professor explained to the competitors that the weapons they would make would be subject to evaluation by Dean Ryu Yunha and Vice Dean Barmit, so he urged them to exert effort to provide a result they wouldn't be ashamed of. The professor announced with a decisive move of his hand the start of the exam, for Se-hoon and his competitor to get ready to launch. Se-hoon looked at his apron, thinking about the chemical smelting technique imposed on them in this challenge. He reviewed the basics of this technique in his mind, reminding himself that it depends on using pure mana only to create resonance with elemental mana, with the goal of preventing it from going rampant and losing control. His competitor interrupted his thoughts mockingly, wondering sarcastically if staring at the materials would increase his mana energy, prompting Se-hoon to turn to him in surprise. Se-hoon asked the young man if he was talking to him. The young man asked sarcastically if he found anyone else in the place. The professor intervened decisively and called the young man by his name, Hans Barmut, warning him of the necessity to refrain from making any comments unrelated to the exam. Hans bowed slightly, showing his cunning agreement, while Se-hoon wondered in himself about Hans Barmut's identity. Se-hoon quickly linked Vice Dean Michael Barmut's name with his competitor's name to realize in shock that this arrogant young man was actually the Vice Dean's son, which explained the clear resemblance between them. Hans noticed Se-hoon's looks and smiled arrogantly, indicating that Se-hoon seemed to have just realized the matter, while Se-hoon felt the situation was becoming more ridiculous the more he thought about it. Hans confirmed with condescension the fact of being the Vice Dean's son, showing his pride in this lineage. Hans began making an unfair comparison between them, describing Se-hoon as being from the commoners and occupying the last place among the new students in terms of family background and mana energy, while he boasted of his belonging to the prestigious Barmut family in chemical smelting, and his possession of mana rivaling the best second-year students. Hans picked up a blue crystal with total confidence, announcing that the result of this exam was decided in his favor in advance. Dean Ryu watched the materials Hans chose, pointing out that they were gems with a high mana content and infused with mana of a water attribute. Kim In-cheol commented, explaining that water mana is sensitive to fire, which makes smelting it extremely difficult. Barmut smiled confidently, considering that those difficulties belonged to the past and that current chemical smelting methods had evolved and differed from what they used to be. Kim In-cheol added, confirming that although chemical smelting isn't restricted by space or circumstances, the smelting time varies significantly according to the user and the ore, and in a situation like this, the required time is 30 minutes. The Vice Dean bragged about Hans's ability to manufacture any ore within only 30 minutes. Hans began directing mana toward the blue stones to float inside glowing magic circles, sparking astonishment at his ability to complete the resonance manufacturing in this record time. Everyone realized that the ability to perform resonance manufacturing in 30 minutes is a level no one can match, even among second-year students, let alone a freshman. Professor Kim finally understood the plot that had been hatched. The tight time for smelting mana stones, the abundance of materials, and the imposition of the chemical smelting method were all set up traps. The professor shot a glance of anger at the Vice Dean, realizing they had chosen from the start an exam topic that favored Hans, who excelled in this type of smelting, describing the Vice Dean as a cunning fox. Meanwhile, Se-hoon was holding a transparent crystal and a group of red stones, catching the dean's attention as she was surprised by his choice. The judges looked intently at the materials he chose, wondering about the reason for his use of stones with a strong fire attribute. The Vice Dean concluded that Se-hoon chose the fire attribute versions of the high mana stones, indicating that he didn't know the extent of his skill, but he certainly possessed high pride. Hans stole a look at Se-hoon, wondering sarcastically if he had chosen an ore that contradicted his ore on purpose. Hans called his competitor a fool in his mind, certain that the weak amount of mana Se-hoon possessed would never enable him to control those violent firestones. Hans smiled cunningly, expecting that he would win this challenge more easily than he imagined. But suddenly Hans was surprised by his competitor's skill, as glowing blue system windows appeared around Se-hoon, announcing the activation of a skill called Affinity Engraving. The system showed the activation of the fire affinity engraving, explaining that it allows the user to wear and use affinity stones on their body directly in specific parts like the arms, for Se-hoon to appear with his right arm glowing with dense fire mana while holding the stone with confident stability. The system screen showed the equipping of Hwa-Ham iron in Sehun's right arm for his hand to ignite immediately with a dense flame. The fires condensed around his arm, sparking astonishment in his competitor Hans, who stood frozen in his place, surprised by this scene, while Sehun stood with confidence and calmness. Hans seethed with anger in his mind, considering that what his opponent was doing was nothing but cheap and useless tricks. Sehun ignored his competitor's looks and began directing the fires around his arm in a circular, coordinated motion, then raised the materials he chose, a transparent stone and 3 red stones, to float in the middle of the flame. The materials rotated and interacted in harmony inside the dense ring of fire Sehun made, upon whose face a confident smile was drawn, while the contrast was clear between his forge burning strongly and his competitor's forge. Barmit watched the situation disapprovingly, wondering sarcastically if Sehun planned to create resonance using the same metal attribute, calling him a fool, and remembering that the basic rule in this field is to use pure mana only. And he expected that this forced attempt would inevitably lead to the elemental mana going rampant and losing control over it in the end. Barmit smiled with malice, waiting for the moment when this fool would cause a catastrophe due to his foolishness, while Sehun continued his absolute focus on directing the fires wrapped around his arm with skill. But suddenly, a massive explosion of mana rang out, for Hans to be surprised by the power of the fires emanating from Sehun's side, prompting the judges to protect their eyes from the intensity of the glow. Meanwhile, the materials were smelting and merging smoothly inside Sehun's fireball to slowly take the shape of an intricate sword scabbard amidst a calm exhale from his side. System messages appeared, announcing the unequipping of the Hwa-Ham iron and the successful completion of the weapon manufacturing, as Sehun held the scabbard named Hwa-Gokshu. Dean Ryu Yun-ha and Professor Kim were struck with total astonishment as they watched the unexpected result. The audience didn't believe he actually succeeded, as the evaluation screen showed that the scabbard was of a rare rank and equipped with fire mana, enabling it to store and amplify it, in addition to the possibility of using the wildfire skill. Hans stammered from the intensity of the shock, not believing his competitor had completed the merging process with this extreme speed. Hans looked at his hands covered in blue mana, muttering about the impossibility of what happened, and confirming to himself that elemental mana must go rampant when used in this direct way. While he was questioning himself and whether he had miscalculated, he tried to merge his mana stone, but the stone suddenly began to crack in his hands, warning of a catastrophe. Hans realized his mistake too late, trying to stop the reaction after he had pumped elemental mana incorrectly into the stone, but the crack widened, letting out a massive blue energy. The stone exploded with destructive power, making a massive roar that swept through the exam hall. In the afternoon, calmness hung over the blacksmith department's exam hall after the incident. Fragments of shattered blue stones were scattered on the ground, and Hans stood with his head bowed and features of defeat on his face, while Professor Kim broke the silence, explaining that in normal circumstances and after the end of the evaluation, that one of the competitors would have been recommended as the best candidate for the department. Professor Kim looked at the defeated Hans, expressing his regret for his loss by withdrawal and failing to complete the task. The Vice Dean smiled, with cunning, suggesting canceling this exam and announcing its re-execution later on the pretext of a student being injured during the evaluation. Professor Kim intervened firmly, refusing to backtrack on an exam that had already been conducted and reminding him that what happened was a direct result of the student Hans's negligence. The Vice Dean shot a sharp look at the professor, accusing him of prioritizing the exam results over the student's safety, which sparked Professor Kim's disapproval. The Vice Dean stood up from his chair heading towards Sehun, protesting that the fastest resonance speed currently published in the Academy takes 5 full minutes. And he pointed his hand at Sehun, wondering how it's possible for a student who just joined the school to achieve resonance the moment his mana energy is activated. Sehun stood with calmness and stability before these accusations, recalling in his mind the true essence of chemical smelting, which originated as a technique for making weapons using mana only when traditional methods fail. And he realized that the goal of chemical smelting is not the traditional way that depends on destroying the ore to fill it with the blacksmith's spirit. Rather, it lies in searching for the roots of the ore's heart and unveiling its hidden life, just as Hans failed to understand it when he dealt harshly with his stone, certain that this is the true and deep essence of chemical smelting. Sehun pointed out with confidence that what he just did is the solution the Blacksmithing Academy will eventually reach after countless attempts of trial and error, explaining that this simple method will become the basic standard within a few years, so it isn't a true secret. And he followed his thoughts that there's no need to teach this method to an old man who only knows how to issue threats, replying to him while pretending not to understand what he meant. The vice dean smiled cunningly and accused Se-hoon explicitly of using a dirty trick to achieve this feat. And he justified his accusation that it is impossible for a freshman student who doesn't belong to a prestigious family to make a weapon of a rare rank, adding that even if he wanted to cheat, he should have made it believable. Se-hoon was surprised by the audacity of this accusation, but at that moment Dean Ryu Yun-ha intervened, approaching them and confirming the vice dean's words that the matter indeed doesn't seem logical. The vice dean thought the dean agreed with him, so he smiled with satisfaction and suggested immediately excluding the student Lee Si-hoon on charges of cheating and moving forward with retesting. But soon his smile vanished and turned into confusion when the dean ignored him and passed him, heading toward the table where the scabbard Si-hoon made was placed. The dean picked up the weapon with her hands and began examining it with extreme care for features of shock and extreme astonishment to appear on her face at the precision of its make, muttering about the difficulty of believing what she saw. In a strange and surprising way, she turned toward Se-hoon with eyes shining and begged him strongly to allow her to taste the weapon or even lick it just once, which sparked the young man's surprise and suspicion. The dean's unexpected reaction sparked shock and astonishment in the vice dean and the professor, and a state of silence mixed with surprise hung over all the attendees in the hall. On that afternoon, Se-hoon was walking with calm steps in the city's crowded streets. He began recalling in his mind the details of the scabbard he made, evaluating his performance objectively, where he realized that the completion of the weapon itself wasn't bad, but the fine adjustments on it were still lacking maturity. Nonetheless, he couldn't hide his ironic smile whenever he remembered the scene of the vice dean trembling with rage, to the point that passers-by noticed his suppressed laugh and found his behavior strange. He stopped suddenly after a sudden idea flashed in his mind, where he realized that the name of the Barmit family seemed very familiar to him. He closed his eyes trying to focus and activate his memory to recall the context in which he heard this name before. His memory returned to his previous life, specifically to a conversation that took place between him and Louise Vallant, where she told him that during her time at Babel Academy, she bought a weapon at a bargain price after performing hard labor for an arrogant person, but the weapon suddenly exploded, and she explained to him with bitterness how that explosion led to her suffering serious mana burns, which made her end up in that miserable state, hurling curses at that person who was the cause of her suffering. Si-hoon linked the threads of the story together, concluding that the blacksmith who caused that permanent psychological and physical trauma to the girl carried the name Barmit, and wondered in shock if Hans Barmit was that intended blacksmith. He thought of his first goal in this life, which was to quickly communicate with those known as the Three Dogs and guide them toward a better path. But he realized now that he might not need to exert much effort to do that with this girl specifically. A confident smile was drawn on his face, certain that by just keeping Hans Barmit under control, he would ensure the girl's path wouldn't deviate in the future. Meanwhile, inside the faculty meeting room of the Perseba department, the vice dean was shouting in protest against the proposal to choose Se-hoon as the best student in the department. Professors of other departments showed worry and hesitation toward this sudden decision, wondering about its seriousness and hinting that it might be a bit exaggerated. Dean Ryu Yun-ha asked with calmness and firmness if they opposed her decision for one of the professors to backtrack, explaining that their position was closer to offering advice than to explicit opposition. The vice dean intervened, claiming that their worry stemmed from the fact that the dean hadn't been in her position for long. The dean shot him a side look, while he continued his talk, admitting that the weapon the student made was indeed impressive, but he suggested the necessity of reviewing and evaluating it with more caution and precision. Kim and Cheol intervened to tell the professors his point of view, that they didn't witness how the student dealt with the materials, pointing out that despite his forging lacking precision, his method of using mana and the extent of his compatibility with the fivefold maps was noteworthy. Another professor wearing medical glasses showed his doubt while reviewing some papers, admitting that the matter is surprising, but he ruled out that it reaches the level of nominating him as the best student. The dean interrupted them, explaining that this weapon perhaps didn't even reach 60% of the level of completion the student originally aspired to, confirming that this deficiency specifically is what makes it promising and proves his massive potential. With a serious and firm look, she directed a final warning to everyone, that if they continued to refuse her decision even after watching the presentation the student would offer, then she would make a decisive decision to step down from her position as the dean of the department, an announcement that came down like a thunderbolt and sparked the astonishment of all attendees in the meeting room. 54 years ago, heaven granted the Tower of Heroes to humanity to guide its evolution and elevation. In response, the underworld launched the Pandemonium, swamp that corrupted all forms of life, granting humanity new possibilities, but at the price of facing a massive catastrophe and destructive monsters. From the womb of that chaos, Babel was born, the greatest academy in history, which rose from the middle of the Pacific Ocean to produce countless heroes over the years to protect humanity. The Emperor of Ascension, Ludwig Schubert, stood addressing the new students at the reception ceremony, confirming to them that they would all become those heroes who carry the banner of defending the world. And the Emperor urged them to move forward, explaining that this is the burden placed on the shoulders of everyone who ascended and joined Babel, and it is their inevitable duty as heroes of the future. The features of the Emperor of Ascension exuded solemnity and prestige as he delivered his motivational words to the listeners. Se-hoon watched him silently from among the rows, thinking to himself that he seems like a good person from this perspective, despite his prior knowledge that he isn't that great in reality. After the speech ended, the presenter announced the start of the demonstration presentations for the best freshman students for this year, asking the top students in each department to step forward to the stage, so Se-hoon and other candidates began heading toward the sandy arena. Se-hoon walked with calm steps, remembering how in his previous life he didn't understand the reason for these top students' condescension and arrogant behavior just for their good performance in the academy. But now, thanks to his excellence in standing in this position, he finally realized the feeling this achievement grants, for the presenter to then announce the official start of the presentations. With extreme enthusiasm, the presenter revealed to the audience the target that would be used in this demonstration presentation to test the students' abilities. The target was a sophisticated ninth model robotic entity known as Automaton, a golem produced by the Marionette Factory, characterized by high combat performance, sufficient to face a C-rank hero on equal footing. Se-hoon analyzed the robot with an expert eye, concluding it was of the combat type, and since it didn't carry visible weapons, it certainly depended on direct physical engagement. The presentations opened with the combat department, as the best freshman student in the Akalkov department, Jake Myers, was called to step forward and offer his first combat presentation. Jake stood in the arena facing the robot, while Se-hoon remembered he was the third son of the Myers family and that he was known for practicing martial arts with fists in a strange way, despite his belonging to a prestigious and ancient family in sword arts, which confirmed the truth of the rumors he heard in the past. Jake took a combat stance in preparation for the encounter, while the robot's eyes lit up in red for the presenter to announce the launch of the awaited duel. With his loudest voice, the presenter released the starting signal, announcing the beginning of the actual combat, with enthusiasm that set the stands ablaze. The robot launched with lightning speed toward Jake, directing a powerful blow, but the young man dodged it with extreme flexibility. The exchange of strikes and quick maneuvers between the two sides and dodging attacks continued, before Jake announced with a confident smile that his turn to attack had come. Jake rushed strongly toward the robot with high focus. Preparing a punch charged with energy, he aimed at his opponent. Jake's fist collided with massive force against the robot's solid structure, leading to it being pushed back strongly and creating a violent shockwave in the combat arena. Debris flew from the power of the strike, while Se-hoon shot a glance at the scene in amazement, remembering that this young man died in his mid-20s as an A-rank hero, and wondering at this exceptional strength he shows at this early age. Jake followed his attack with other crushing strikes, making Se-hoon realize that a combat talent of this high level only appears in Babel once every decade. Se-hoon wondered in extreme confusion about the mysterious reason that prevented someone with these brilliant abilities from exceeding rank A in his previous life, while Jake landed lightly and gracefully, announcing the end of the combat. The parts of the shattered robot rolled on the arena ground after it was completely destroyed, for the encounter to thus end with a swift and crushing victory for the student. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead with a comfortable smile, indicating with relief that it had been a long time since he was able to stretch his muscles in this good way, while the presenter looked at him stunned by what he had just seen. The presenter praised with warmth and astonishment the amazing presentation the student Jake offered, highlighting to the audience his supernatural ability to take down a robot possessing the strength of a C-rank hero in a few moments, and with one breath, amidst the shock and wonder of the followers. Jake waved his hand to the audience amidst the cheers and applause, for the presenter to confirm via the loudspeaker that this exceptional performance is exactly what is expected from the best freshman student in the combat department, Akalkov. Se-hoon realized that Jake had stolen the spotlight completely and seized everyone's attention from the start, expecting that the next person to ascend the stage would face massive psychological pressure to offer a presentation matching this brilliant level. And soon the presenter announced the next presentation, calling the best student in the support department, or the apprentice Erika Inoue, to step forward. So a girl with long black hair passed by Si-hoon, heading calmly toward the arena to start her presentation. Se-hoon realized then that this girl was the top student of the heir support department, concluding to himself that there was no need to worry about her feeling pressured. The girl's name was Erika Inoue, the eldest daughter of the Inoue family, one of Japan's 3 great noble houses, and she walked with confident, calm steps. Se-hoon recalled that she wasn't a conqueror of the tower in his previous life, but she had made a name for herself as an S-rank hero who wielded a legendary-grade weapon. For he knew that her inevitable fate was corruption and transforming into a demon in the future, and that she would meet her end by execution at the hands of her own family. For that reason, Se-hoon was certain that getting close to her would bring nothing but trouble. But at that moment, Erika turned to cast a fleeting glance at him as she passed by. That look left him confused and wondering if she had truly intended it for him. It was then announced that the automaton designated for her demonstration was a 9th model equipped with additional armor, giving it a defensive strength 1.5 times that of the standard model. Everyone watched with excitement to see what kind of performance Apprentice Inoue would provide against this massive armored opponent she stood firmly before. With total calmness, Erika opened the door of the cage she was carrying to reveal a black crow perched inside, and with a look in which her eyes glowed blue, she ordered her bird to launch. The crow took off, soaring into the arena's sky with a sharp cry, while Si-hoon watched the scene, wondering in amazement at the point of using a mere bird in a fight like this. The automaton took a tight defensive stance, leading Se-hoon to conclude the difficulty of piercing that solid armor, especially with the automaton specifically geared for defense, while the crow continued to fly high in the sky. But with a confident smile drawn on Erika's lips, blue magic circles began to form around the crow, which transformed into a majestic form. The crow launched with all its speed toward the automaton to pierce it with a crushing attack, leaving Se-hoon shocked as he saw the automaton's solid armor cracking and shattering under the weight of that strike. The automaton fell to its knees on the ground, announcing its total defeat and destruction, while the crow returned quietly to land on the finger of Erika, who stood in the center of the sandy arena with full pride. The stands ignited with cheers of admiration and astonishment, and the presenter shouted, stunned by the brilliance of the display, praising her ability to pierce the defenses of an automaton equivalent to a C-rank hero with just one strike. Amidst the audience's continuous chants of Erika's name, Se-hoon felt a real predicament, realizing that the current enthusiastic atmosphere would make him vulnerable to the audience's disapproval and jeers if he merely displayed his equipment as a blacksmith and then left the stage. Finally, his turn came when the presenter announced the calling of the best freshman in the Perseba Technical Department, Apprentice Lee Si-hoon, who stepped toward the arena holding his sword. The presenter repeated the announcement of the start of his demonstration, while the Emperor of Ascension watched him from his platform with interest, preparing to evaluate him as the supervisor of the displays. The Emperor commented, praising the exceptional level of this year's students, and adding that it had been a long time since the blacksmithing department provided a top student, expressing his hope that the pressure wouldn't be too great on the boy standing before them. Dean Ryu Yun-ha replied with confidence, asserting that he would be fine, while the audience wondered enthusiastically if this student would be able to surpass the amazing displays provided by his predecessors. Se-hoon stood in the center of the arena and slowly drew his sword from its scabbard, revealing the details of his weapons consisting of the high-quality 5-colored fire blade and the rare-rank elemental affinity-infused scabbard. Some students noticed the weapon was of a rare rank, exchanging surprised looks, and considering a freshman being able to craft a weapon of such rarity to be truly insane. Despite that, others saw that the weapon's appearance looked very ordinary and lacked visual impact compared to the dazzling displays of the other departments, which made the Vice Dean smile wickedly, believing that heaven was on his side. The Vice Dean felt certain in his heart that the student's failure to leave a strong impression would guarantee his seizure of the dean position of the Perseba department, while the current dean shot him a sharp look full of annoyance at his cunning. The presenter began by announcing the provision of a 10th model automaton possessing a combat strength equivalent to a D-rank hero for the purpose of this display, but Se-hoon interrupted him firmly, rejecting this proposal. With a confident tone, Se-hoon asked them to bring a stronger 8th model automaton, stipulating that it also be equipped with additional armor to increase its durability. Se-hoon's request fell like a thunderbolt on the presenter, who broke into a sweat from extreme confusion, wondering in shock and disbelief at what this student had just uttered. The presenter thought to himself that the 8th model alone is capable of withstanding the attacks of B-rank heroes, and that asking for armor to be added on top of that is extremely exaggerated. The presenter protested the difficulty of preparing such an automaton in a short time, explicitly accusing Se-hoon of trying to ruin the demonstration with his impossible demands. But before the presenter could finish his words, a voice interrupted him, confirming the delivery of what was requested, as Professor Kim appeared, dragging the armored 8th model automaton into the arena, leaving the presenter in a state of total shock at the speed of response and fulfillment of the impossible request. Professor Kim gave his student one last look, then wished him luck in the display arena with encouraging words, asking him to unleash his potential. After that, the presenter turned in confusion and, after a moment of hesitation, loudly announced the official start of the display. From the viewing platform, the Emperor of Ascension hoped to himself that Se-hoon would provide a display worthy of the occasion. Se-hoon stood confidently on the battlefield, wondering in his heart whether he should fulfill those expectations placed upon him. Se-hoon slowly drew his sword, and the glow of the 5 colors appeared from his blade, sparking the astonishment of some students who recognized the weapon's power. But Hans commented with coldness and disdain, considering what he saw to be nothing but a worthless visual display. Meanwhile, Se-hoon was recalling the properties of his unique sword. The 5 colors forming its blade carry a conflicting nature, and any attempt to release them without immense control over mana would lead to a violent explosion that might claim the user's life. But he had the solution, thanks to his fire-infused scabbard that enabled him to store and control the flames. By merging the red flame of the scabbard with the power of the blade using the Flame Artisan skill, he was able to successfully complete the energy injection process, while the armored automaton prepared for defense. Se-hoon unleashed the wildfire skill latent in his scabbard, which led to the release of a massive explosion of compressed mana energy. If this skill is released while the 5 compressed fire demons are inside it, they will all explode at once with massive destructive force. The hall shook violently, and the presenter didn't believe what he saw, wondering in shock about the identity of this mysterious young man. Se-hoon stood in the middle of the destroyed battlefield, contemplating the magnitude of the destruction he had caused, wondering with a sarcastic smile if he had crossed the line this time. The presenter trembled as he screamed into the microphone, asking the support and construction team to head immediately to the main hall to repair the damage, then with difficulty announced the end of the demonstration display for the top students. Later, in the dean's office, Ryu Yunha entered to find Se-hoon waiting for her. She apologized for being late, justifying it by being busy helping to clean the battlefield. But Se-hoon took the initiative to apologize as well, expressing his regret for destroying the main hall in that manner. He added in a regretful tone that he should have been more careful, sparking the dean's surprise as she wondered about the reason for this apology. Se-hoon asked her in astonishment if she had summoned him to scold him for what happened. The dean denied that immediately, explaining that the reason for summoning him was completely different. The dean coughed in embarrassment before gathering her courage and moving to the heart of the matter. Then she presented him with a sudden offer, telling him she was ready to pay 10 times the market price. She asked him to sell her the 5-colored fire sword and the fire-infused scabbard. Se-hoon was surprised by this request, and at that moment, a system window appeared before him, announcing the creation of an affinity link with Ryu Yunha. Ryu considered the weapons he made to be amazing, while another notification appeared confirming that the link level between her and the creator Lee Se-hoon had reached level 1. Se-hoon realized the link had already formed, unlike his previous life, where the matter required feeding her weapons several times before its establishment. Se-hoon thanked the dean in his heart for this opportunity and decided to exploit it immediately, using his skill in affinity extraction. A dense blue energy appeared around him as he extracted a special grade affinity from the target Ryu Yunha. The energy condensed in his hand to form a unique piece of iron. It was of an advanced grade and superb quality, capable of generating heat by devouring iron and smelting it, forming what is known as mad blood steel. The dean repeated her question about whether he would sell her the weapon, but Se-hoon answered her with a categorical rejection, which sparked her resentment as she reminded him that he had already completed his task. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door for Professor Kim In-cheol to announce his presence. The professor told the dean that the president had ordered the start of the honoring ceremony immediately. Then he asked her permission to take the student Lee Se-hoon with him, and she nodded in agreement reluctantly. Se-hoon told the dean he would see her later and then left, leaving her alone in her office, feeling extremely frustrated at the missed opportunity to obtain those weapons. After his departure, he headed accompanied by Professor Kim to the heart of Babel Academy, the old main building known as Marduk Palace. On their way through the luxurious hallway, the professor advised him to act politely before the president, reminding him that the president had generously overlooked the incident of destroying the hall during the display. And he confirmed to him that the president is a figure at a completely different level from them. But Se-hoon reassured him calmly and confidently, telling him not to worry about him. When the massive doors opened, a solemn voice coming from the far end of the room greeted him, identifying the student Lee Se-hoon. It was the Emperor of Ascension, President Ludwig, whom Se-hoon remembered from his previous life. He is the hero who met his end while fighting the Sea of Ruin, one of the 6 great demon gods. The president commented that the weapons he displayed were interesting, which Se-hoon considered a comment befitting the status of a summit climber like him. The president added that it couldn't be said they were perfect, but they made him look forward to the future of this student, a phrase that sparked Se-hoon's resentment in his heart. Although he was prepared for such criticism, he felt insulted and felt the urge to throw his masterpiece into the nearest furnace. As a reward for his talent and effort, the president announced he would grant him 2 prizes. Se-hoon thought about the offer for a moment, then asked for rewards that would increase his magical power and his memory, which sparked the president's interest. With a wave of his hand, the president summoned 2 unique artifacts. The first was the heavy dark ink of hero rank and superb quality, a piece that has the ability to absorb magical energy from anything it touches. The second was the dreaming ivory, a tusk of a legendary animal of hero rank and medium quality, possessing an illusory power, enabling it to cross the boundaries between reality and dreams. Astonishment struck Se-hoon as he saw the 2 pieces. The dark ink was rare, but the dreaming ivory was an artifact almost impossible to obtain. A confident smile was drawn on his face, realizing that despite the difficulty of dealing with them currently, he possessed a clear idea of how to use them to his advantage. The president asked him if the rewards had gained his admiration, and Se-hoon replied that they were perfect. After Se-hoon left, a mysterious entity that was with the president wondered about the reason for granting him 2 rewards above anyone else. The president answered calmly that he only did that because this young man possesses an indescribable ability to deal with them. The other entity told him he felt as if he saw an old soul inhabiting a young body. The president replied to him that this means the young man possesses great depth to appear in this image. Then he added in a tone carrying a lot of admiration and mystery that even he himself cannot fathom the depths of that profundity. In one of the academy's corridors, Hans rejected his friend's invitation to have lunch, apologizing that he had plans with Howard. His friend was shocked when he realized he meant the best third-year student in the Perseba department. Hans bragged that their families were close and that Howard had asked to see him to offer him some advice about life in the academy. At that moment, Se-hoon entered the hall, and one of Hans's friends tried to invite him to join them. But Hans shot Se-hoon a sharp look full of threat, for Se-hoon to reply with an icy look in which his eyes glowed, broadcasting terror into the heart of Hans, who couldn't withstand it. Hans looked away in submission, while Se-hoon passed in front of him, thinking to himself that his opponent had finally realized his true place. Hans was pressing his fist in suppressed anger, lamenting his defeat before someone who possessed no background or support. Meanwhile, Professor Kim and Cheol entered the classroom, asking everyone to take their places in preparation for the start of the lecture. After he confirmed the attendance of all students, the professor announced that since this is the first lesson, they would start by introducing themselves in a special way. Then he revealed a box full of glowing alloys, explaining that this material is known as projection alloy. The professor grabbed one of the alloys, explaining that it is dozens of times more sensitive to magical energy than ordinary ores, then injected a bit of his magical energy into it as proof of his words. In an instant, the alloy reacted with his energy, to be shaped in his hand as a massive black sword surrounded by a fiery aura, explaining to the students they can, in this way, easily manifest the weapon they imagine in their minds. Se-hoon watched the display with admiration, realizing that this level of skill is what placed the professor among the top 100 craftsmen in the world. But at the same time, he felt a massive seriousness and power emanating from the professor, exactly as he felt before with President Ludwig. The professor explained that because of this extreme sensitivity, it's difficult to use these alloys as actual weapons, but they, in turn, reflect traits the user may not be aware of, allowing them to reflect on themselves and discover them. For this reason, the weapons made of this alloy are called avatars, or symbolic manifestations, and he announced that introducing oneself in the smelting department would be done through creating these avatars. He added that their creations would be displayed in the main building for a full week, so he urged them to do their best, a matter met by the students with enthusiasm and determination. Hans grabbed a piece of the alloy, thinking that its cost exceeds 10 million won, and that Babel's methods are luxurious even in the simplest matters like introducing oneself. After Hans gathered his energy, he manifested a decorated golden sword, but Se-hoon watched the scene with coldness, thinking that despite appearances, none of these students possessed the most important talent. Finally, the professor called on Lee Se-hoon to introduce himself, so the young man grabbed his alloy, thinking that as the best student in the department, there was no need for him to hide his true strength. Since he decided to participate, he resolved to do his best and show his full abilities. A massive energy emanated from his alloy that swept through the hall and stunned everyone. A week later, students gathered in the main building to watch the displayed avatars, and it was clear that the reason for this crowd was the work provided by Lee Si-hoon. One of the students mocked the idea that a freshman could be at a different level, and another agreed with him as they looked at the simple swords displayed. But their surprise was extreme when they read the sign. Explaining what happened, Si-hoon's alloy had absorbed 19 other surrounding alloys during the shaping process, and the administration decided to display the result as is, considering it proof of his brilliant talent. Some students tried to downplay this achievement, considering it a mere coincidence, or a result of his use of several alloys, while one of the female students commented sarcastically that a long time passing since a student from the smelting department excelled makes others want to believe he is a genius. But Erika Inoue disagreed with them, and so did Jake Myers, who agreed with her. Jake contemplated the masterpiece before him, then commented that this massive amount of alloys was apparently not enough to fully express the reality of Lee Si-hoon and his abilities. In the blacksmith workshop, one of the assistant trainers was watching Si-hoon working with extreme precision, to the point that there wasn't any error even by a hundredth of a second in his hammering. The trainer wondered in confusion what he could teach a student with this level of skill and decided to simply pass him. After the rest of the students finished their training, the trainer announced the end of the lesson, but Se-hoon remained in his place, continuing his work with focus. Se-hoon grabbed his hammer, ready to continue polishing the piece in his hand. But before he could strike with his hammer, the assistant trainer stopped him, asking him if he intended to shatter it again. The trainer reminded him that they must hand over this piece after the smelting lesson for this week, so Se-hoon was surprised by the word hand over. The trainer explained to him that Babel supports the students materially after reviewing the performance of the weapons they sell outside, as a way to secure a budget for their activities. Then the trainer asked him about the reason for his dissatisfaction. Was it his body or the mana energy he had? Se-hoon answered with a tired smile that the problem currently lies in his body, as he needed to smelt heavy rocks to make training tools, but he lacked the endurance for even the attempt, then collapsed onto his workbench, panting from sheer exhaustion. The assistant trainer suggested to Se-hoon that if the matter was about smelting, using magical enhancements would be faster than physical training to increase his strength. This idea sparked the interest of Se-hoon, who smiled to himself. It was a method he had avoided in his previous life, so it had never crossed his mind. But since his current body lacks endurance, he realized that by using enhancements, he would be able to smelt the heavy rocks he needs. Se-hoon thanked the trainer for his advice, so the trainer dismissed it as nothing. In turn, Se-hoon took the initiative to offer advice to the trainer during his work, explaining that he uses an excessive amount of mana during hammering and that he should reduce it to 70% and concentrate his strikes on a single point. Then he added that this would be better for the time being, leaving the trainer in a state of shock, unable to believe that a freshman student had dared to advise him. Elsewhere, Babel Academy encouraged its students in self-learning, where they could attend classes from other departments and even study dozens of classes in one semester. However, there were two basic conditions. The first is the necessity of the student completing his major courses, and the second is that he will be dismissed immediately if he accumulates 3 failing grades. Freedom was available, but students had to bear the responsibility for their choices. The train arrived at its next station, which is the Shamanism department. Upon its arrival, he caught a glimpse of Erika Inoue standing with some young men, but one of them interrupted him rudely, asking him to clear the way. Se-hoon felt resentment at their behavior, believing that they are the ones who should clear the way. But before the situation developed, Erika turned towards Se-hoon and asked him about his destination. He answered her that he was going to the Shamanism department because he was thinking of taking a minor specialization, which sparked the surprise of the young man who was accompanying her. Erika offered to be his guide, and one of the young men tried to remind her of a gathering after that, but she told him to go without her. Despite his insistence that the elders wanted her presence, she replied coldly that she wasn't interested and left them in a state of shock. While they were walking, Erika asked him about the type of minor specialization he was looking for exactly. He explained to her that he wished to learn enhancements that strengthen physical abilities, provided they don't interfere with the precise control required by smelting. She suggested barrier techniques to him, so Se-hoon wondered if she specialized in defense only. She answered him that the matter depends on how they are used. To clarify her idea, she summoned magic circles around an envelope she was carrying, then asked him to try to tear it. Se-hoon noticed that the strength of the envelope didn't increase, but rather the matter was different from that. The envelope maintained its original properties, but it only hardened when a large force was applied to it. Se-hoon concluded that this technique is perfectly suitable for the smelting process, and Erika told him he would need the help of a professor to reach this level of complex application. Then she added that the spell formulas seemed strangely familiar to her, and revealed that the barrier construction professor is married to one of her relatives, and offered to introduce him to him. But suddenly Sehun understood something, and with a swift movement, he shattered the magic chains that were binding the envelope. Erica was struck with extreme shock and wondered in herself how he managed in this short time to understand her family's barrier technique and shatter it. Sehun smiled and acknowledged that barrier techniques are indeed worth the interest, and thanked her for her advice. Then he told her that he was going to register his academic classes and suggested she go eat with the young men who were following her. The young men ran toward Erica to check on her, but she was silent and lost in her thoughts. She realized that she had given him that invitation sealed with magic as a test, and never expected that he would be able to break its seal with this ease. In the magic department in Or, Sehun was walking with Erica. Their presence together sparked the curiosity of other students who began whispering, wondering about the reason for Erica's presence with another student, as some mentioned they saw them together the previous day, and even during the exhibition. Sehun noticed the rumors that began to spread, but he mocked people's excessive interest in other people's affairs. He knew in his heart that if Erica had any real feelings for him, the link between them would have already been established. Sehun wondered if they conduct checks on students before accepting them into classes, so Erica told him that she had registered in the class already and was asked to attend to take a test first. She explained to him that this forest is the designated test arena for building barriers, which sparked his surprise. While they were walking, he saw other students searching for something desperately, so Sehun thought sarcastically whether the test was a treasure hunt game. He continued walking with Erica, considering the whole matter a waste of time. Suddenly, Sehun stopped after he felt the presence of a hidden barrier, and with a strike of his foot on the ground, he shattered the illusion to reveal a real forest and two assistants waiting for them. One of the assistants was surprised and told him that he had passed the test, which left Sehun confused. In the office of Professor Robert Perry, the barrier construction professor in the Or department, the talk was about Erica's sudden interest in the top student from the Perseba department. His assistant explained that he wondered why she registered for a beginner's course, but the matter was clear now. The professor expressed his annoyance at the doubling number of applicants because of her, but he wasn't happy about it. Then he revealed the presence of a special request from young Master Inoue to add a test. This test used the maze of illusory spirits. This maze was a basic barrier that distorts the senses and causes a person to get lost, but a person ignorant of magic wouldn't realize its existence in the first place. Even though Erica didn't provide any help, Sehun was able to pierce the maze relying on his instinct only, which sparked the assistant's admiration. After all the applicants passed the first test, the assistant announced they would all take the test. Then he announced a second test, based on which classes would be divided, so one of the students volunteered to start first. This student saw in the test an opportunity to catch Erica's attention. The assistant explained that the second test is simple, as every student must dismantle the barrier before them, using mana only while keeping its structure intact. The barrier was in the shape of a spider web, with a spider made of mana in its center. This barrier was characterized by its spider escaping constantly whenever it felt mana through the web, and as long as the spider remained intact, the web regenerated endlessly. The first student faced extreme difficulty, as he tried to follow the traditional way and surround the entire magic formula, but he discovered his lack of sufficient mana. So he resorted to an alternative strategy and decided to pressure the barrier with speed. He succeeded in dismantling the barrier after 2 minutes and 23 seconds, but he regretted not focusing on understanding its structure better. The assistant commented that his performance wasn't bad, and the student thanked him, while a number of other students failed the test. The assistant announced that all those who failed would start in the beginner's class, then called on Erica Inoue. Erica stepped forward and began performing the test with calmness and confidence. In one moment, she dismantled the barrier completely, sparking shock and astonishment in the attendees who didn't believe her supernatural speed. Everyone realized at that moment what it means to be the top student in the department. Erica finished her test recording a time of 22 seconds, and even though the trainer praised her performance, he pointed out that the standard dismantling method would have shaved off 2 additional seconds, which Erica accepted calmly, promising to take his note into account. Finally, it was Lee Se-hoon's turn to step forward, so the trainer shot him a scrutinizing look, evaluating him in his heart, as not appearing to have anything special or exceptional about him. Se-hoon knelt before the magic spiderweb, thinking he would discover the matter for himself, and began contemplating it closely, sparking the confusion of students and trainers who wondered what he was doing and whether he realized that the test had already started. Se-hoon stared at the magic barrier's details with intense focus to conclude in his mind that this barrier shares some properties with heavy stone ore. He recalled in his imagination the nature of that ore, which repairs itself and returns to its original state if it isn't subjected to a minimum level of stimulation, and for this reason, its smelting requires balancing the ratio of all stimulants and injecting them at the same moment. Sehun remained sitting before the web without moving a muscle, which increased the surprise of the trainer, who wondered to himself what this boy was doing, for heaven's sake. The trainer intended to intervene to alert him, but Erica stopped him calmly, asking him to leave him alone to continue what he was doing. At that moment, Sehun reached an idea. If the barrier resembled heavy stone, what if he could retain the stimulants accumulated in it? He passed his hand glowing with red mana over the web's threads to begin reacting. The fires erupted in the magic barrier, burning completely, and Sehun stood up, announcing he had finished the task amidst everyone's shock, while he was looking at a blue bracelet in his hand, certain that thanks to this knowledge, he would be able to polish heavy stone. The trainer looked stunned at his watch, which recorded the passing of 7 minutes and 45 seconds. Professor Perry considered the time taken to be meaningless, for it's true he took 7 minutes this time to understand the structure, but if he faced the same barrier in the future, he would drop it in a matter of seconds. The professor realized that this boy didn't just settle for destroying the barrier, but rather devised an anti-magic formula to destroy that spell from its roots. Erica watched his back as he moved away with shock and admiration, thinking that if he merged this complex magic understanding with his smelting skills, she would tremble just imagining the type of legendary tools and weapons he would craft. Later, specifically in the administration office belonging to Babel Academy, an email was sent, announcing the application of student Lee Se-hoon for a medium-level smelting process using materials of hero rank and above, asking interested professors for supervision to communicate with the office, making the employee wonder lazily about the number of those who would apply this time. He had hardly finished his wondering when his phone started ringing continuously, as dozens of messages poured in from professors of different departments asking to supervise the smelting process, which amazed the employee at the speed and intensity of the response. The employee noticed that no one from Vice Dean Michael's line had applied for supervision, concluding that the rumors about the tense atmosphere there because of his son dropping to second place were completely true. While the employee was preparing to choose one of the applicants, his eyes widened in shock when he read a sudden message stating that the department dean herself would take over the supervision of student Lee Se-hoon's smelting process. In the blacksmith workshop, Se-hoon was standing holding the heavy stone and the required materials, surprised by the voice that called him. It was Dean Ryu Yoon-ha who stood before him with her serious features, so Se-hoon initiated by saying he assumed she was too busy to come herself, so she answered him that she, in her capacity as the department dean, came to check his skills personally. Se-hoon smiled and turned toward his furnace, considering that since the matter had reached this point, he must do his best before her, while Ryu Yoon-ha followed his movements with intense interest. The first step in smelting the dark, heavy stone began as Se-hoon grabbed the hexagonal black stone, recalling in his mind that there are many ways to deal with it. But he chose the hardest way of all, which is what is known as the dark veil method, where he prepared a container full of a dense black liquid. This method depends on placing the dark, heavy stone in a dark space completely void of light, so he dropped the stone into the container. As soon as it is submerged, the stone spreads in the liquid like water, and the matter requires separating the impurities from inside it using pure mana only. And during this complex process, the stone's size shrinks significantly, but its purity doubles. He realized that the matter seemed easy theoretically, but it is in reality like restructuring the material from scratch, which required intense focus from him. Se-hoon took out the stone after its size shrank to a quarter, amidst the dean's close observation looks, estimating that if he continued shrinking it more than that, the performance of the final weapon wouldn't be sufficient. Then he moved to the second step, where he gathered his energy and concentrated it in his hand. He launched a glowing red flame, then began passing mana through this flame to choose the appropriate sparks for the smelting process. The fire settled and turned into a bright green color, which is known as the Guardian Forest Fire, which is characterized by a unique property, enabling it to maintain the temperature it was at the moment of its formation without change. In the third and final step, Se-hoon wrapped his hammer with these green fires and struck strongly with it on the dark, heavy stone, realizing that the key now is to continue hammering without any stop or rest until the distortion in the stone is reduced thanks to the properties of those guardian fires. Dean Ryu Yoon-ha watched what was happening with intense focus. Although her immunity to fire meant she wouldn't burn, she felt the extreme heat and pain emanating from the power of the flames in the room. She wondered deep within herself about the extent of the effort and pressure Se-hoon exerted on himself to reach this stage, while he continued to hammer forcefully, emitting radiant green flashes with every strike of his hammer. Time passed slowly at the academy until evening fell, while the dean tried to resist drowsiness. After 4 continuous hours of smelting, Se-hoon's hands began to tremble from extreme exhaustion, yet he remained gripped to his heavy hammer, refusing to surrender. Finally, the dark heavy stone became saturated with fire until reaching its maximum limit, causing its properties to begin changing, and it stopped deforming entirely. Sehun moved to the next stage, using tongs to melt the treated dark stone and place it into the smelting crucible. Then he began pouring the black liquid into a pre-prepared mold, sparking the astonishment of Ryu Yunha, who wondered why he used the casting technique instead of hammering, realizing that the darkness inside the mold would alter the material's properties. The dean watched the mold, wondering in confusion about what was going on in this young man's mind and the significance of his sudden step. Sehun smiled confidently, announcing the start of the fourth step, for the dean to realize in shock that he was using a formula to break barriers with the aim of slowing the heavy stone's transformation, exploiting that time loophole to build a mana circle inside it. In the next moment, the stone mold shattered to reveal a system message announcing the completion of the Dark Spider bracelet, praising his challenge to biases and his success in extracting the material's full potential, proving his exceptional skill that qualifies him for the title of distinction as a blacksmith. A notification appeared about his acquisition of the Black Soul Thread skill, while Sehun panted heavily as this work had drained all his energy. Sehun looked with a smile of satisfaction at the bracelet, which was classified within the rare rank of medium quality, and which possesses the property of absorbing its wearer's mana and increasing its weight based on that, announcing that the process had been crowned with success. Sehun approached Dean Ryu Yunha with heavy steps, and at that moment, the dean's stomach made a loud sound expressing hunger, causing her extreme embarrassment. Dean Ryu Yunha wondered if what had just happened was his specific resonance phenomenon, to which Sehun replied in the affirmative. Sehun thought that the bracelet is not that strong currently, but if he planned well, he might be able to use it to obtain a complete set effect. Sehun placed a bowl full of the treated dark stone remains before the dean, apologizing for his inability to provide real equipment to her, after all the trouble she endured to watch him, hoping she would be satisfied with this for the time being. The dean's unique skill, Dragon Soul Furnace, activated as she picked up one of the pieces and put it in her mouth. Sehun was surprised when she asked him if he knew that this was edible, for the dean to answer him while chewing the piece that its taste resembles fried tempura crumbs. Sehun wondered to himself about this description, questioning whether in his previous life he had become accustomed to meeting her strange taste in consuming weapons and metals until he became an expert in it. He concluded that at this rate he would be able to raise the link level with her very easily, then told her with a calm smile that he was happy the food had gained her admiration. The dean continued, eating the pieces, but she showed slight resentment, indicating that it was a pity to eat these remains while looking at that wonderful equipment he had just made and placed on the table. The dean seized the opportunity to ask him about when he planned to process the 5-colored flower sword and the red fire herb. Sehun shook his head in denial, confirming that he did not intend to sell them at the moment, prompting the dean to wonder in confusion if the price she offered was insufficient. Sehun explained to her with a smile that he was keeping them to prepare for the subdual lesson, adding a proverb stating that hunger is the best seasoning for food. He promised her that if he managed to prepare any equipment worth presenting, he would tell her first, for the dean to smile with satisfaction and tell him she would look forward eagerly to that day. The dean asked him if he had finished all the smelting work for tonight, and he answered, in the affirmative. She suggested that they leave the place, indicating that the staff would come to take over the cleaning task, which Sehun considered a source of relief for not having any remaining energy to do it himself. Sehun tried to stand, but his strength failed him and he fell backward. The dean quickly managed the situation and caught him before he hit the ground. She asked him with concern if he was okay, and Sehun smiled weakly, admitting that he had slightly miscalculated and distributed his endurance. The dean offered to take him to his dormitory and surprised him by asking if he was afraid of heights. Sehun denied his fear of heights with a smile, and at that moment Dean Ryu Yunha surprised him by carrying him in her arms, before dashing with him into the air by the power of her fire. She soared with him high above the academy buildings, while he watched the scene in shock, wondering to himself about the magnitude of the massive power she managed to extract just by devouring the remains of the stone mold. The dean continued to fly with confidence and stability, showing superb prowess in controlling her energy. Sehun contemplated the situation with a light smile, acknowledging that many things had already changed from what they were in his previous life before returning through time, thanks to his interventions. Meanwhile, Erika Inoue was standing alone before the main building under the cover of darkness, waiting anxiously and wondering about the reason for Sehun's delay, as she intended to hand him a special invitation. But her long wait, which extended for 3 hours in front of the blacksmithing department, did not pass unnoticed. Rather, students' eyes caught it, and her picture spread quickly on the Academy's electronic bulletin board amid students' questioning and mockery about the reason for her long wait. Varied comments, deciding to depart in the belief that if it were important, they would have searched for him. The classroom door opened for trainer Ricardo Smiles to enter, introducing himself to the students and announcing the start of his lesson on understanding tools. Without any introductions, the trainer ordered the students to head immediately to the training center, threatening the last to arrive with running 20 laps around the track, then dashed out quickly, sparking the attendees' terror. Chaos filled the place, and students crowded toward the door in a desperate attempt to avoid the harsh punishment the trainer threatened them with. Si-hoon joined the running race with his colleagues, wondering in confusion if this class was theoretical in essence, as was expected, but he continued running anyway, following the herd. Se-hoon ended up arriving late to the wide sandy arena to be imposed with the punishment of running 20 laps. He ran while panting heavily, trying to overcome his exhaustion. Si-hoon realized the extreme weakness his current body suffers from and its lack of endurance to reevaluate the effort he exerted in the medium smelting process last night, wondering if he had drained his energy incorrectly. Trainer Ricardo stopped the running and gathered the students before him, explaining to them that this class was supposed to be theoretical to study the structure of weapons, but the curriculum had changed for an emergency reason. The trainer revealed the reason represented by a series of continuous attacks targeting blacksmiths, who make fire swords of hero rank and above, who are known as Yomdo hunters. Si-hoon remembered this case, which remained an unsolved mystery even before his return through time, while the trainer continued his explanation, confirming that no matter how strong the defenses a blacksmith wears, his body is his last line of defense. Based on that, the trainer announced that the new goal of this class is to provide them with real skills to protect themselves alongside their deep understanding of the tools they make. The trainer moved to practical application, while Se-hoon realized the necessity of being extremely careful this time. To compensate for the acute lack in his endurance, Se-hoon decided to rely on the equipment he made, so he activated a special mana energy from one of his accessories. He utilized the properties of the dark spider bracelet he wore, which is characterized by its ability to absorb mana energy and use it to activate the explosive gravity skill within a limited range. This process led to significantly enhancing all his physical stats, increasing his determination and resolve to develop this weak body and make it fit before the end of his first academic year. After he completed the required laps, Se-hoon collapsed while panting heavily following the explosion of energy in his body before the trainer ordered him to stop running and approach. Se-hoon stood up lightly, which caught the trainer's attention, who noticed that his fitness and movement seemed much better than he expected. The trainer raised his sword and asked his student to direct a blow at him to test the extent of his prowess in fencing arts. Se-hoon grabbed his sword, contemplating the situation, realizing that restricting his movement by the gravity resulting from the bracelet would make it difficult for him to move freely and fluidly. Despite knowing that the technique he was thinking of was not perfect, he decided to try it and use it in this situation to compensate for the slowness of his movement. Se-hoon brought down his sword in a direct strike. The trainer blocked it with ease, surprised by its extreme slowness. But one of the apprentices noticed at the same time that the structure of the strike and the attack stance were perfectly correct. Soon the trainer corrected his internal evaluation, showing great admiration for the sword's path, which took a precise and perfect path, as if it were the sword of an expert who knows his destination with extreme accuracy. The trainer exploited Si-hoon's momentum to give him firm advice that he is too hasty, confirming to him that accepting defeat and moving forward is part of learning. The trainer's eyes widened as he imagined an attack coming toward him that he could not block or avoid. Trainer Ricardos felt an indescribable shock, wondering to himself how a student from a technical department could broadcast terror into his heart, to the point that he imagined for a moment an imminent attack he couldn't avoid. This astonishment prompted him to ask Se-hoon seriously about the identity of who taught him this fencing style. Se-hoon recalled in his mind a quick memory, wondering how he mastered this skill, which he claimed took only 10 minutes to learn. It was a skill he acquired in the past to pay off a debt to an old man who offered to teach him instead of money. Se-hoon answered the trainer with an evasive answer, claiming he learned it approximately through watching the battles of other heroes on video sites, which left the trainer puzzled. Despite his ambiguous answer, the trainer offered him to learn fencing properly. He decided to write him a recommendation letter to attend a lecture in the Akalkob department for physical control studies, and later that day, Si-hoon headed there. Upon his arrival, Si-hoon found a chaotic scene where the professor was kicking out the student Jake Myers, refusing to teach him anything. Si-hoon didn't believe his eyes when he recognized the professor's identity. It was Ma Guang-soo, the retired S-rank hero known by the nickname Swordbreaker. Astonishment struck him as he realized that the old man he knew as an addict to gambling and drinking was in fact a professor at the academy. Se-hoon stepped forward and introduced himself as a first-year student from the Smelting department and presented trainer Ricaros's recommendation. The blonde student whispered to the professor that the newcomer is the top student in the Perseba department for this year. But Professor Ma didn't seem to have any interest and continued to look at Se-hoon with disdain. Then he posed a sudden challenge to the young man, telling him he would accept him as a pupil only if he could defeat Se-hoon. The professor announced that the duel would be on a sudden death system. The winner is the one who delivers the first effective blow. With the starting signal, the fight began. Se-hoon took the Talryuk stance, a technique that increases flexibility by abandoning physical strength. His opponent realized that the optimal response to this stance is direct engagement rather than striking, so he launched toward him. The professor commented with resentment that Se-hoon's opponent had started practicing mind games even before the actual fight began. The young man tried to grab Se-hoon and avoid his strikes. Se-hoon felt a massive power emanating from him as he grabbed him. But the young man was surprised when Se-hoon used a sudden skill. It was explosive gravity, which knocked them to the ground with crushing force. With this, the duel ended with a victory for Se-hoon, who commented with a smile that he was a bit faster. After moments of silence, the young man contemplated the attack that had just happened. Ma Guangsu ordered everyone to leave, confirming to the young man that he would fulfill his promise and teach him because he won. Se-hoon replied cunningly, suggesting that since he was the one who hit his student, perhaps the student should teach him. This comment provoked the young man, who realized the magnitude of the scandal that would happen if the news spread of the best student in the Akalkob department being defeated at the hands of a student from the Perseba department. The professor agreed with Se-hoon's logic and decided that at the very least he must make that foolish student capable of earning his living. The student rejoiced at this decision, as the professor told him he would set a time for training and he must attend. The student bowed in deep gratitude, thanking the professor for granting him the training opportunity, but the professor indicated to him coldly to leave as long as the matter was over. But Se-hoon remained in his place, where the professor told him he had a special matter he wished to discuss with him. After the place was cleared, Professor Ma Guangsu asked him to show him the sword technique he supposedly used against Ricaros, which Se-hoon agreed to immediately. Se-hoon took the attack stance, then dashed with a swift and sudden strike. But the professor managed to block it easily, to admit that this technique depends entirely on the element of surprise. The professor grabbed the sword, criticizing his style. Although the idea is good, the execution was flimsy, and he wondered about the point of a technique that becomes a burden on its user after the first attempt. Then he scolded him sternly, threatening him that if he taught this nonsense to another person, he would have shattered his limbs, which sparked a sarcastic smile on the face of Se-hoon, who knew the professor himself was the one who taught it to him in his previous life. Nonetheless, the professor promised him he would build him a body suitable for that primitive technique, and asked him to wait and see. Se-hoon seized the opportunity to ask him if his registration in the class had been confirmed, so the professor answered him in the affirmative. After a moment of confusion, Se-hoon bowed respectfully and asked permission to leave for that day. When he left, the professor muttered to himself, amazed at the audacity of that boy. But outside he found the blonde student waiting for him, who addressed him sarcastically, denouncing his condescension while he is nothing but a repair worker. But the student stopped him before he went far, telling him he had something he wanted to give him, and presented him with an elegant black envelope sealed with wax. That was an invitation to the Nobles, a gathering for students who take pride in their prestigious family backgrounds. Se-hoon wondered deep within himself if this was the invitation Erica intended to present to him. The student explained to him that although this gathering is full of arrogant people, he saw in it a good opportunity for him. So Se-hoon hesitated to accept it. But the student insisted with a broad smile, considering it a simple token of gratitude for helping him join the class. Se-hoon accepted the invitation, thanking him, then went on his way thinking about the minor specializations he had applied for so far. Barrier construction and physical control, and the idea of studying a specialization in the Perseba department also occurred to him. While he was thinking about the available choices of curses, chemistry, and spells, he bumped into a girl with reddish-brown hair, who apologized to him immediately. The bracelet he was wearing caught her attention, so she asked him if he was the one who made it. He replied to her asking her what if he were the one who did. The girl offered him with a strange smile to enchant his bracelet for him, and at that moment, a window appeared before him announcing the establishment of a link with Leah Claudel. Leah Claudel was the magic genius who became famous in the future for making legendary weapons by raising their rank 2 full levels through enchantments. That girl, who was said to have shattered the entire magic industry, looked with intense interest at Se-hoon's bracelet, realizing it was a rare piece made of heavy ore. She was lost in her thoughts, muttering about the possibility of adding more magic formulas to it before backtracking, considering that the bracelet is too precious to end up like that. While she was in her confusion, Se-hoon, who was watching her quietly, asked her if the bracelet was bad. She explained to him enthusiastically that the problem is not in the bracelet, but in the abundance of ideas she has about it, wondering at the amazing compatibility between it and magic even though it is made of heavy ore. She admitted that she couldn't even decide which formulas she would use because of their abundance. So Se-hoon reassured her calmly, saying that it's okay. The girl was surprised by his reply, for him to reveal to her another exactly identical bracelet, telling her that he has more. Then he added that these bracelets enjoy the resonance effect, which was information that struck her with extreme happiness and intense enthusiasm. To ask Se-hoon seriously about his identity, so Se-hoon defined himself as a first-year student in the blacksmithing department and the top student in the Perseba department for this year. Leah was struck with astonishment at him being a freshman student, then introduced herself enthusiastically as a third-year student in the magic department. But meanwhile, a young man with serrated blue hair who was standing beside them interrupted them, telling Se-hoon that they must talk and asked him to follow him for a moment. Leah protested at the young man interrupting their talk, while Se-hoon wondered to himself if this was one of Erika's followers. Although the young man wanted to talk in private, Se-hoon refused that and insisted he say what he had in their place. The young man demanded Se-hoon apologize to Lady Erika for his inappropriate behavior, accusing him of tearing up the invitation she presented to him in front of everyone. But Se-hoon answered him calmly that the young lady was the one who asked him to tear it up. The young man followed up his talk indicating that his words might be true, were it not for the fact that Se-hoon had received another invitation from Myers, which meant his behavior was a deliberate insult. Se-hoon asked him if Erika was the one who sent him. The young man denied that, claiming he acts of his own accord. Leah interrupted them sarcastically, wondering if there is anyone who doesn't know that he is merely a guard dog for that young master. Her words provoked the young man, who released a massive dark energy, describing Se-hoon as an ender who deludes himself into thinking he's someone special. He continued his threat, reminding him that Babel is full of those who are much better than him. But Se-hoon replied to him with a sarcastic question about whether he was talking about himself. This reply made the young man lose his mind, so he screamed at him and released his full attack. The attack manifested in the shape of a blue ghostly monster that dashed toward them, so Se-hoon had to protect Leah. But he soon realized that the attack is not composed of mana only, but is an illusion that uses a real dagger as a medium to be able to cause physical damage. The young man wondered in shock about how he discovered that, while Se-hoon answered him with indifference as he grabbed the dagger. And with a cunning smile, Se-hoon commented on the delicious sound it made before a system window announced the activation of the affinity seal, Greedy Iron. The young man screamed, lamenting his dagger, which cost 1,000,000 won, while Se-hoon muttered to himself that it's no wonder one goes crazy for a taste like this. The system window showed details of the Greedy Iron ability, which is an advanced grade and superb quality piece that generates heat through devouring other iron and forming iron blood. Then Se-hoon launched a counterattack known as the Explosive Ring. Se-hoon dashed toward him and directed a powerful blow that knocked him to the ground. After the attacker's magic cleared, Se-hoon completely ignored the scene and turned to Leah to ask her about the classes she recommends. Leah thought for a moment, then suggested he join a class in the magic department, and she enthusiastically recommended the Ancient Magic class, hinting at the presence of a brilliant and amazing top student there named Leah Claudel taking that class. Elsewhere, the young man was staggering away, not believing that a freshman student managed to keep up with him at this level, before Erika surprised him by appearing suddenly and asking him to show her the dagger. The young man was struck with astonishment at her presence, wondering since when she had been watching them. He handed her the dagger in confusion, and she ordered him not to inform her brother of what happened, and that she would take over informing the head of the family herself. She immediately noticed the presence of an anti-confiscation spell engraved on the dagger, which is expected from a weapon used as a medium. But the matter sparked her astonishment, so she wondered deep within herself if Se-hoon had devised a counterskill based on Professor Robert's theory and her own magic. Meanwhile, Se-hoon was in the class examining a group of daggers, evaluating his abilities and concluding that his efficiency in refining techniques is no less than rank S, and that he must raise his efficiency in magic to rank A. Suddenly, a sudden system window appeared before him announcing the establishment of a connection with the target Erika Inoue, which sparked his surprise. Se-hoon realized that Erika must have been spying on him during his fight with her follower. But he didn't care about that, considering the daggers he obtained appropriate compensation, and saw that despite their primitivity, they would be usable if coordinated with a black soul magician. In the lecture hall, Se-hoon was feeling bored while listening to Professor Kim and Cheol. Although he was looking forward to this class, he found himself listening to theories he already knew by heart. The professor announced the start of the practical side of the lesson. He explained that even if the metal is the same, its shape can change completely based on how the mana matrix inside it is modified. These applications for shape transformation were what determined the diversity and capabilities of weapons. For this reason, he emphasized the importance of the blacksmith understanding the latent potential in the metal he deals with. He announced that they would train that day on transforming metals using an iron alloy. The students were first asked to manipulate the mana matrix to create a crack 3 centimeters deep in the center of the alloy and then return it to its original state, alerting them that the alloy had been modified to respond sensitively to transformation. Se-hoon concluded from this that the professor did not completely reject the idea of magic refining. Then the time limit was announced to be 10 minutes. With the starting signal, the students began working, but most of them faced extreme difficulty as they failed to return the alloys to their original state. However, Se-hoon and Hans managed to complete the task successfully at almost the same time. The professor announced that they would move to the next stage, where he would display a matrix as an example, and they must apply it. Hans felt confidence in himself, believing that since their speed and mastery were identical, he would be able to win this time. Then the professor displayed an extremely complex matrix and asked them to apply it. Hans was able to shape the alloy according to the displayed matrix, and he seemed extremely happy with the result, considering it perfect from all aspects. But the professor called him by name, then ordered him to return the alloy to its original shape. Hans was struck with confusion and suddenly discovered that the mana matrix had been completely damaged. The professor explained to him that the alloy was not able to withstand the transformation, which means the treatment method was wrong from the start. Even though Hans had followed his instructions literally, he failed to understand the true potential of the metal, which was what the professor had emphasized previously. He explained that if it is impossible to restore the modified matrix, the gear does not transform, but deteriorates. And this deterioration constitutes a major variable in quality and performance. So he asked them to examine these aspects carefully from now on, so Hans promised him to take that into account. Hans wondered to himself if Se-hoon had noticed this trap, but he soon shook the idea, believing that perhaps he was just lucky. Suddenly, Se-hoon restored his alloy to its original shape easily, sparking the astonishment of the students who didn't believe what they saw, wondering how he succeeded after the professor confirmed that was impossible. The professor asked Se-hoon to show them that transformation again. Se-hoon smiled wickedly, realizing he had deceived the professor, explaining that the matter was only possible because the alloy was specifically modified for the students, and that if it were an ordinary alloy, the matter would have been impossible. The professor realized the truth, and that the matter was possible due to the sensitive nature of the alloy, and he felt regret because he failed to notice that himself. At that moment, the memory of Ray Kinsei, the greatest blacksmith in history, who managed to pass all floors of the tower, returned to Se-hoon. The transformation formula he devised, known as the truth of iron, was a fundamental and difficult problem for all blacksmiths. Se-hoon thought that the formula, which had stood firm for decades, could not be broken, and wondered deep within himself if the professor really believed a student like him could accomplish such a thing, realizing that if he broke it again, that would be the second time. After the class ended, the professor called the student Lee Si-hoon and asked him if he had a moment, so Si-hoon responded, wondering about the matter. The professor told him to consider it an acceptance gift, thanking him for his help in choosing to join Babel. When he opened the box, he found inside the Crimson Flame Jewel, a rare ore of the highest quality possessing the ability to melt mixed ores. The professor explained to him that if he absorbed the essence of this jewel, he would be able to strengthen his Crimson Flame permanently, adding that he prepared it specifically for him after hearing he deals with this type of flame. Se-hoon thanked the professor, confirming that this gift would be a great help to him. Then the professor asked him if he was interested in joining the elective course he teaches. Se-hoon wondered if he meant weapon origin studies, which sparked the professor's surprise at his knowledge of it. Se-hoon confirmed his knowledge, muttering to himself that this class is one of the best-funded classes in Babel. Se-hoon hesitated for a moment, recalling that he had never heard Kim In-cheol's name before his return through time, which suggested to him that this professor's end was not good. But he realized that currently, he is still a professor who enjoys attention, so he decided to join the class. The professor was surprised by his decision after hearing that he had already registered for several elective classes. But Se-hoon downplayed the importance of the matter, explaining that the total is 4 classes only. The professor extended his hand, expressing his looking forward to working with him from now on, so Se-hoon shook it, confirming that. At the moment of shaking hands, a system window appeared before him announcing the extraction of affinity from the target Kim In-cheol, and that the connection level had reached level 1 to obtain a unique metal piece, which is fire-infused iron of a high rank that can store flames inside it. Later in his room, Se-hoon contemplated his ability. concluding that if it is possible to extract minerals from someone, this means the human body can also be smelted and treated. He knew that the presence of multiple mana types in the body causes a conflict that is fatal to a blacksmith's precision, and for this reason, it was common to deal with one attribute only. But he was different. After he exhausted the mana energy that suppresses heat in his body became ready to absorb the essence of the crimson flame. He realized that what he must do as a blacksmith is to build a mana circle inside his body dedicated entirely to the crimson flame. In the end, he decided to smelt himself. This process bore fruit in the appearance of a notification stating the strengthening of his attribute mana as the crimson flame rank rose. He also acquired a new rank S skill called Divine Body Refining Magic, a skill that refines internal mana circles to increase physical abilities. As a result of this skill's effect, all his stats significantly increased. Sehun recalled a painful memory of someone who scolded him in the past for his surrender without even trying to use the materials available before him. That voice was asking him sarcastically if he was a fool, and how he expects success in this way. This memory awakened his resolve, for him to decide firmly that he will use everything available to him this time. He resolved not to leave behind any regret, whether what he faces is a future ally or an enemy. On another day in the blacksmith workshop, the trainer announced they would put the final touches on the pieces they made in previous sessions, which are scheduled to be handed over, inside and outside the campus. He confirmed that what they produce that day will determine their performance level for the entire first semester, so he urged them to do their best. The students responded enthusiastically and began working. But Sehun was standing holding his sword, feeling frustration, considering his work a complete mess, as he realized that his body was not able to keep up with his skills, leading to the appearance of imbalances everywhere. Sehun realized while hammering the metal with force and focus in the workshop that he does not have the luxury of slacking or taking things simply. He continued his sequential strikes amidst flying sparks and erupting flames before he submerged the glowing blade in water to cool it, for the steam to rise densely. Then he wiped the sweat from his forehead as he contemplated the sword he repaired, considering that this amount of modification would be enough to fix it. He thought in his heart that he would not have enough time to fix the rest of the weapons, and despite his certainty that he would have guaranteed obtaining a larger budget if he completed them all at an acceptable level. Nonetheless, he believed that refining one weapon in a correct and perfect way is much better than distracting his effort to start passing the blade over the whetstone with extreme care. Before that familiar and terrifying sound suddenly echoed in his ears, the sound of roaring waves resembling the sound of the world's collapse. For he knew with certainty that whenever this mysterious sound rang in his ears, this means he has succeeded in forging something great and exceptional. He contemplated the sword, which now emitted a special brilliance, realizing that the sharpness it acquired was not just a temporary sharpness, but rather a cutting edge engraved into the very essence of the blade. At that moment, a system window appeared before him announcing the completion of the weapon under the name Sword of the Great White Light, praising his skill which exceeded the elite level for extracting the material's full potential, and announcing his acquisition of a new rank C skill called White Light Style. The details showed that the weapon is classified within the rare rank of high quality, and that it is a great sword forged with a pure white edge, its polished blade synchronizing with mana circles to give a sharp and fierce aura, and its sharpness increases when saturated with mana, evaluating the result in himself as being very acceptable considering he used only ordinary iron in its manufacturing. He smiled with satisfaction and confidence, feeling that his great skills and experiences he possessed before his return through time began returning to him bit by bit. On the other side, some students were grumbling about the weight of their weapons and the difficulty of the task, to the point that one of them wondered in despair if he should withdraw and leave the academy from extreme fatigue. On the morning of the next day, which is Saturday, Sehun met Leah in one of the open cafes inside the university campus. Leah expressed her surprise at his desire to watch her magic process, so he explained to her that he was curious about the basics of her work, and since the place was crowded, she reassured him that her private workspace is somewhat isolated and quiet. They walked together away from the main buildings toward wide green spaces, prompting Sehun to wonder in surprise whether the place was very far, for Leia to answer him playfully, wondering whether he thinks seeing her magic is something this easy. They finally arrived at a rustic wooden building, carrying a sign indicating it is the Kalkob workshop, for Leah to announce enthusiastically their arrival. As soon as they entered, Leah called loudly to her grandmother, announcing her return for an old woman who was holding a frying pan to turn toward them, telling her sharply that she is not deaf. The old woman shot Sehun a scrutinizing look and asked her granddaughter if this boy was her boyfriend, for Leah to deny that categorically while feeling annoyed, while Sehun stood confused at this situation. Leah intervened to introduce him as the top student in the Perseba department for this year, but the old woman clicked her tongue in disapproval, considering that Babel has truly ended if it accepts children who look this soft. The old woman introduced herself by the name Helena, so Se-hoon exchanged greetings with respect, introducing himself as a first-year student in the Smelting department. Helena ordered her granddaughter to stop wasting time and start working, indicating they have a pile of tasks this week because of the new students. So Leah nodded in grumbling agreement. Helena acknowledged her welcome, then pointed her hand to show them the way to the workshop inside. Se-hoon noticed the quality of the frying pans and tools hanging, concluding in himself that this old woman's skills are better than he expected, and wondered about the reason for her running a tool store in an isolated place like this, before he turned to Leah, who was carrying a frying pan and a stirring tool in a way that seemed exaggerated. Leah caught his attention to what resembles a makeup color palette, explaining that this is her magic palette, and that the colored powders inside it are made of ground mana stones. Se-hoon contemplated the palette with interest, recalling that the usual standard is 8 colors, but she was using a much wider selection, and asked her if her task here is to restore damaged magic formulas using these powders. Leah confirmed the correctness of his conclusion enthusiastically, explaining that this work allows her to earn money and practice her magic to the extent she wants without bearing the concern of the cost of expensive materials, then grabbed a paintbrush in preparation to start. She dipped the brush in a glowing golden powder and began drawing her magic formula brilliantly on the back of the frying pan for an intricate and glowing magic circle to form. Se-hoon watched her work precisely, recalling in his memories that he came here because he heard in his previous life that the magic department was going through a state of stagnation and decline. And he remembered that defeated follower young man, wondering that someone who brings failure in every exam and cannot even maintain his position as department head was a part of this stagnation. While he was looking at Leah as she was immersed with passion and creativity in drawing her magic circles, he realized in his heart that by seeing this level of talent personally, he became fully understanding the real reason behind this stagnation, and more importantly, that he realized the appropriate solution to overcome it. Se-hoon watched the girl Leah as she was lost in her work, and smiled to himself, realizing that her ability for total immersion in what she does is a talent in itself. He contemplated the frying pan she enchanted and noticed intently how magic harmonizes with mana circles to give the tool special effects. Seeing this workshop prompted him to feel an urgent desire for work, so he turned to the old woman, Helena, telling her that his hands yearned for engraving the white light again after a long break, and asked her to grant him the opportunity to try. The old woman agreed on the condition that he be actually capable of that, and asked him to choose what he wants from the pile of accumulated tools, making Se-hoon shot her an annoyed look, wondering to himself if she was exploiting him to complete her accumulated works. But his attention was soon drawn toward a specialized and high-quality whetstone, so he smiled, convinced that the availability of a tool at this level deserves from him the attempt. He picked up a knife from among the tools to test its blade, while Helena watched him with interest, wondering about the reason for his choice of that piece specifically. Se-hoon examined the knife precisely and noticed its edge is perfectly aligned and its axis is perfectly straight, to conclude that it was made by an expert hand that truly knows how to deal with swords. He headed after that to choose the whetstone, picking the stone with the most compressed and equal mana particles, and began his work believing that the maker of this knife will be able to use it brilliantly even if he sharpened its edge to the maximum extent possible. Se-hoon launched into sharpening the blade with swift and fluid movements, sparking Helena's astonishment as sweat dripped from her forehead while she wondered in shock whether this boy was truly just a freshman student who joined the academy this year. At that moment, Leah screamed enthusiastically, raising the frying pan high to announce her completion of work, before being surprised by her grandmother's presence behind her and posing a question to her about when she came, for the grandmother to answer her sarcastically that she does not know. With a firm tone, Leah scolded Helena, indicating she tried to hunt for this younger student's mistakes, but she ended up receiving a lesson that puts her in her real size. And the grandmother did not settle for words, but rather directed a quick flick on Leah's forehead that sent her glasses flying, demanding she be quiet, then turned toward Se-hoon to ask him if he had finished his work. Se-hoon answered her with a confident smile that he provided the best he had for the time being, promising her to provide better performance in future times. The old woman sighed and asked you to leave, for Leah to grumble about her grandmother's bad mood, and accompanied Se-hoon outside. Helena remained alone, contemplating the knife Se-hoon left on the table, and at that moment, a man wearing a pinstripe suit burst into the workshop, calling her enthusiastically and inquiring whether she was busy in smelting processes. Helena shot him a sharp look and ordered him to lower his voice, so the man apologized while rubbing his head, justifying his haste by the accumulation of requests he has, and asked her about the location of the kitchen knife. Helena criticized his adherence to working in the restaurant, indicating that he is a main professor in the fencing arts department and should not be busy with these matters. But he ignored her scolding, asking her not to intervene in other people's hobbies, then picked up the knife from the table. As soon as the professor looked at the knife's blade, his features changed, and he asked his sister Helena with suspicion whether she had sharpened it while she was drunk again, so she denied that strongly, for him to suggest that one of the assistants close to her was the one who did it given the noticeable improvement in their skills. Helena surprised him by telling him that the one who did that is a freshman student, which struck him with a shock that made him wonder in disbelief, so she confirmed to him seriously that he is a student who joined the academy this year, wondering in her heart about the real identity of that mysterious boy. Meanwhile, Sehun and Leia were walking together outside, where Sehun mentioned information stating that the grandmother who runs the tool store was a former professor in the mineralogy department, which was confirmed by Leia, adding that she retired 5 years ago and opened that store. Sehun inquired whether there was a hidden reason behind this retirement, so Leia answered him that she does not know anything special, indicating that many professors had left that department during the last decade. Sehun received this information with deep thinking, realizing that the mineralogy department will become the weakest in Babel in the future, making him certain that this leak of professors is not something that can be ignored simply. Leia interrupted his train of thoughts by asking him enthusiastically about his evaluation of the magic process she performed, so Sehun praised its solid basics, describing her work as good and free from flaws. Leia laughed with shyness and humility, but Sehun surprised her with a frank comment when he told her that her thinking is narrow and limited. Leia stopped shocked for him to explain to her that she thought of a better way to execute the magic, but she refrained from using it, making her stammer, wondering about how he knew what went on in her mind. Sehun completed his talk in an advisory tone, showing that ignorance can be treated by learning, but possessing knowledge and not applying it is the real problem, and confirmed to her that the innovator's imagination is his weapon and talent, and that she is suppressing that talent inside her. Leia recalled with bitterness memories of previous failures, and replied in her heart, defending herself, that she realizes that well. Sehun took out a tool and began explaining his idea practically, demanding she focus intensely because of his lack of time. And he provided her with a deep analogy, explaining that if you were asked to place a stone under the water's surface, the blacksmithing process is represented in making that stone and placing it there, while magic's role lies in carving the image of that submerged stone to appear clearly above the water's surface. Sehun continued his explanation to Leia, showing that magic carries a nature resembling dreams, then demonstrated that practically by activating a crimson aura he called Crimson Lotus on the knife's blade. With a swift movement, he changed the aura to a pure white flow he named White Radiance Flow, sparking Leia's astonishment and fascination. He explained to her that true enhancement is not granted to the weapon's appearance, but is planted in the depths of its internal structure. And he added that if one layer is not enough, the magic can be divided into several layers, then ignited the crimson aura again on the knife. With a sudden movement, he threw the knife strongly to pierce the air and create a shockwave. The knife plunged into a tree trunk for a sharp killing intent in the shape of a cutting white flash, following the path of the crimson lotus to flow from it. Sehun considered that what he did does not amount to being full real magic, but it serves the purpose. And while Leia was lost in deep thinking, he became certain in himself that geniuses always pave their way to progress even in moments of their hesitation. Suddenly, Leia broke her silence and screamed with extreme enthusiasm, demanding he lend her that knife. She began shaking him with eagerness and pleas, promising him that she would reforge it in a proper way and return it to him. And before her insistence, Sehun handed her a full set of knives calmly, telling her to take them all as long as she was willing to do that, for the girl to fly with joy and express her thanks and deep love for him. Leia launched off quickly, leaving behind dust, and at that moment, a system window appeared before Sehun, announcing the extraction of a level 1 link from the target Rhea Claudel, for him to smile to himself, wondering at her youthful energy brimming with vitality. Later, in the crowded stands of the martial arts arena, Sehun was anticipating the event, thinking that today is the date of his meeting finally with one of the 3 dogs, in a battle gathering between the young mad dog and the demon destruction god. Erika Inoue interrupted his thinking as she was standing directly behind him and sticking to him, so he asked her coldly what she was doing. She answered him with features devoid of expressions that she is following him, so he asked her if she would leave if he asked her to do so. She agreed immediately, but added that she would settle for monitoring from a close distance, making Sehun sigh in his heart, realizing she would not truly leave him alone. Sehun surrendered to the reality and asked her to enter with him. And meanwhile, the system displayed the tools he obtained from his links. The first was the Society Communication Stone from Erica, which is a high-quality ore that modifies the disturbed internal mana arrangement when mixed with other metals. As for the second, it was the False Explosion Catalyst from Ria Claudel, which is a multicolored ore of the highest quality, enhancing the potential of mixed materials to their maximum limits. Inside the massive arena, the presenter welcomed enthusiastically the new students to the martial arts hall to watch the classification match. The presenter introduced herself by the name Lan Fang, the youngest professor in the martial arts department. Then she began introducing the competitors, announcing the entry of the arena's champion, a fourth-year student and heiress of the ancient Myers family in producing S-rank heroes. The presenter sang the achievements of the champion, who sat on the throne of first place for 3 consecutive years, describing her as the perfect hero of rank A. Amidst the audience's cheers, Arya Myers, nicknamed Lady of the Holy Sword and Conqueror of the Hero's Tower, entered the arena with confident steps. Sehun and Erica watched the scene amidst the audience's madness, while the presenter announced the first challenger who dared to face the champion on this day. The challenger was the best third-year student in the Spear Arts Department, ranked 10th in the combat hall, and heir of the cultural heritage represented in the spear of the withered flame wheel flower. Sehun smiled when he saw the young man with purple hair, Yom Song-ha, entering the arena, welcoming in himself their first meeting. The fight erupted fiercely, as Song-ha launched violent and sequential attacks with his flaming spear toward Arya. But the champion blocked his strikes brilliantly, prompting Song-ha to retreat backward while grinding his teeth from the intensity of the pressure and frustration. Arya remained maintaining her calmness and confidence, using a circular defensive aura to block his fiery stabs with ease. Sehun followed the duel with a critical look, noticing that Song-ha's performance was below the required level, even considering his young age, and wondered in his heart whether this heir to a prestigious technique had not received proper support and guidance. Sehun scrutinized the details of the fight to conclude that there were many annoying things in the young man's style, but the biggest and most obvious problem lay in the weapon he held in his hands. The duel ended with Yom Song-hwa admitting his defeat after Arya placed her sword against his neck. Arya Myers stood tall and was declared the winner of this confrontation. The arena buzzed with cheers, while the host, Lan Fang, announced her intention to conduct interviews with the competitors. However, Song-hwa had already left the place early due to special circumstances. Arya laughed gently, noting that facing the 9th-ranked fighter directly would be harsh even for her. The host took advantage of the situation and suggested replacing the interview with a Q&A session, which was met with shouts of approval, leaving Arya under the spotlight while Song-hwa quietly withdrew into the darkness. Sehun noticed the boy's foul mood, so he stood up, deciding to leave. Erica asked if he was going to depart without finishing the viewing, and he coldly replied that he was not fond of such events. Sehun walked down the stands, inwardly describing the heroine as annoying, while Erica watched him in confusion, wondering why he was angry, though she felt some relief that he hadn't come for her brother. Meanwhile, Arya contemplated him with curious eyes, considering him an interesting freshman. She thought with a mysterious smile that there might be one person worth paying attention to. In a garden near the martial arts hall, Song-hwa sat alone, sighing heavily. Sehun approached him with quiet steps, contemplating the live version of the young man before him. Sehun recalled his memories of him. Despite his bad temper, he was the backbone of the Death Squad, and the person who ultimately sacrificed his life to topple the god of the Sea of Ruin. Sehun hoped he could obtain the Link Stone peacefully this time, before the young man lost his mind as he did in the future. So he took the initiative by asking Song-hwa if he was following the duel. Song-hwa turned his head slightly, acknowledging to Sehun that he possessed some skill for being able to find him in this place. Then he turned toward him fully, recognizing him as the top student in the Borseba department, and sharply asked why he was here. Sehun was surprised by his hostile reaction, trying to ease the atmosphere by asking to speak with him for a few moments. But Song-hwa rudely rejected his request and ordered him to leave. Sehun insisted, explaining that the conversation would benefit him as well, and asked him to listen just once. This persistence provoked Song-hwa's anger, and he released a dark aura, expressing his intense hatred for the weak, who cannot do anything on their own and delude themselves into equality just because they have ordinary talent, concluding by ordering him to forget the matter and go back. Sehun remained silent for a moment, inwardly comparing this situation to the days of the Mad Dog in the future, where the young man seemed more polite now. In the past, he used to attack him with his spear, shouting at Sehun to know his place as a blacksmith and stay back. Sehun realized that this situation would never be resolved with words. Song-hwa looked sharply at his opponent, realizing that Sehun did not intend to back down, but Sehun told him he would say only one thing. With a confident and provocative tone, he asserted that the legacy of the Flame Wheel Flower Spear would end because of him. These words ignited Songhwa's rage to the limit, causing him to rush in with a sweeping and direct attack. In response, Sehun activated the affinity seal Steel Seeker, causing his fist to glow with immense energy. Sehun delivered a powerful punch that scattered the flaming spear's attack, knocking Songhwa back in a state of shock that a blacksmith could block a punch saturated with his mana. He admitted to himself that Sehun didn't earn the title of top student for nothing, and that he might have been worth the trouble of talking to. Songhwa noticed that the trace of his mana was still lingering in the air, so he gathered his strength, preparing to show the true power of his spear. Songhwa rushed with all his might in a massive fiery attack, shouting that this was the end. But Sehun, with a simple and calm movement of his hand, managed to disperse the enormous fire attack and extinguish it completely. Songhwa stood dazed, unable to believe his eyes. The remaining embers, which were supposed to respond only to his mana, were dancing between Sehun's hands, raising confused questions about how they could have transferred to him in such an impossible way. Songhwa was deeply shocked. Not only did his opponent block his attack, but he also managed to steal the essence of his energy and control it, which brought a confident smile to Sehun's face. Sehun realized that his opponent was about to completely lose his mind. Sehun recalled a scene from the future where Songhwa's volatile mood caused a horrific massacre of the Flameflower sect. Realizing he was facing a naturally dangerous personality, Sehun ignored his opponent's anger and rushed to block another attack, but he felt deep down that the effect of the Steel Seeker skill was about to run out, and that his body had reached its limits. Sehun became certain that attempting to establish a peaceful link with Songhwa had become impossible, and that he must now subdue him by force to achieve his goal. But before he could land his decisive blow, Jake Myers suddenly intervened and stopped his punch at the last moment, much to Sehun's surprise. Songhwa asked him if he knew the top student from the Borseba department, and he replied hesitantly that he knew him somewhat. Songhwa ordered them to leave, and Jake complied immediately. Then Jake grabbed Sehun enthusiastically to leave the place together. As they were walking away, Sehun tried to say something to Jake, but the latter interrupted him, telling him to be quiet and hurry his steps. Songhwa stood alone, regaining his composure, overcome with regret for losing his temper and revealing his strength in such a way, which almost endangered his master's reputation and martial art. Jake scolded his friend Sehun for the recklessness that almost cost him his life, questioning why he would cause trouble with an older student. But Sehun received his warning with a cynical smile, downplaying the danger and considering the idea of death completely ridiculous, which only increased Jake's confusion. Sehun admitted to himself that the situation was somewhat dangerous, and at that moment, a window appeared before him announcing the successful establishment of the link with Songhwa, and that his next step was to extract the affinity. Sehun contemplated the matter, comparing Songhwa's relatively calm personality at present with the Mad Dog version he knew in the future, realizing that this difference might change the effect of the affinity stone, meaning he must find a way to raise the level of affinity between them. Then Sehun turned his attention to Jake Myers, thinking that he seemed like a useful person as well, and asked Jake if his hand was okay. Jake laughed cheerfully, assuring him that his hands were the toughest part of his body, and there was no need to worry about them. Sehun repeated his words with light irony, before Jake turned to him with a serious tone to ask him something more important. Jake inquired seriously about what Sehun had said regarding his older sister, Arya Myers, while they were in the arena. Sehun replied indifferently that it wasn't special and that she was just a bit of an arrogant girl, causing Jake's eyes to widen in shock, realizing that this was why his sister had asked all those questions about him. Jake realized with excitement that his sister had shown a genuine interest in Sehun, and this belief became firmly established in his mind. To Sehun's surprise, it turned out that Arya had actually heard their conversation despite the crowd's noise, so Jake scolded him for his words, reminding him that she was an A-rank hero. Sehun smiled to himself. Arya's interest was exactly what he was seeking, as he knew that Songhwa's greatest obsession was defeating Arya, and thus attracting her. Attention would make his own presence more significant to Songhwa. Jake warned his friend against taking the matter lightly, pointing out that he didn't know his sister well, describing her as narrow-minded and fond of schemes. But he soon retracted his words, considering that he might have exaggerated slightly in describing her, which prompted Sehun to look at him seriously, wondering about the real reason he hated her so much. Sehun's memory went back to Arya Myers, the Saint of the Holy Sword, who once stood among the corpses of monsters contemplating her sword, considering it ordinary and not meeting her ambitions. That heroine had suddenly disappeared without warning, only for a demonic blade made from the remains of a demon god to appear in her place. Arya had transformed into a dark entity, carrying that sword and embodying the demon god of destruction. Sehun ended his recollection with a mysterious smile, muttering to himself that her face looked fake, signaling his knowledge of her dark truth. Then Sehun waved goodbye to Jake, who remained in his place confused, trying to process what had just happened. Meanwhile, Jake Myers was receiving a message from his sister, Arya, expressing her interest in Sehun, asking him to keep bringing her news of that interesting boy, making Jake realize with sorrow that he had turned into a mere mediator between them. As soon as he read the message, another ring interrupted him, making his limbs tremble with fear. It was a message from his sister, who was asking him with feigned kindness to do her a favor, making Jake sigh bitterly and continue on his way in resignation. The next morning, Sehun sat in the lecture hall suffering from severe exhaustion, wondering to himself if he had overdone the fight with Yom Song-hwa the previous day. Hans, who was sitting next to him, noticed his poor condition and quickly announced that he would be teaching their main classes for the next 2 weeks, and that the subject of the lesson would be attribute refinement. The students whispered among themselves, as that professor was known for his eccentricity and unpredictable behavior, before he announced that he would distribute some papers first. The professor explained that he would distribute the evaluations of the assignments they submitted last week, in addition to the budget allocated to each student for the first semester, and began calling their names one by one. Finally, the professor called the name Lee Sehun, who raised his head from the table, while the other students expected his budget to be at least 3 times higher than theirs. But the professor surprised him by saying that his budget had not yet been determined, which aroused Sehun's confusion. The professor explained that the level of mastery in Sehun's work was extremely high, and for this reason, it was chosen to be displayed in the special auction for second-year students on Wednesday. He told him that his budget would be determined based on the final price his work reached at the auction, and that he had to wait until then, making Sehun think that this might be one of Vice Dean Michael's schemes to target him. But he quickly reassured himself that Professor Kim and Cheol would have stopped the matter if there were a real problem, so he answered the professor with understanding. The professor announced that the subject of today's lesson was residual mana, and that they had a student who had volunteered to help them with the explanation. Then he invited the assistant to enter, and everyone was surprised by the entry of Yom Song-hwa, a third-year student in the Spear Arts Department, as their temporary assistant. The students were amazed by the presence of a senior student from another department in their class, while the professor sarcastically commented that they should show this same interest during their studies. After finishing the introduction, he asked them to focus on basic concepts before starting the practical side. The professor began his explanation, clarifying that residual mana in weapon manufacturing appears in 2 main forms. The first type is the standard charged type, while the second is the independent type that produces mana itself or absorbs it from the surrounding environment, noting that each has its advantages and disadvantages, but the independent type is the most difficult to create. The reason for this is that the method of building the mana core is not fixed, but varies according to the materials, techniques, and the creator's own mana. For this reason, he advised the students to start with the charged type for now, then asked the assistant to step forward. Song-hwa demonstrated his abilities, summoning a dense red mana energy, while the professor explained that fire element mana is highly volatile and difficult to use, but suppressing this characteristic gives it remarkable stability. This was the technique Song-hwa was demonstrating before them, as he formed glowing fire rings, a technique known as the Yomryun residual fire spear. The students were impressed by his superior ability to control fire mana, so much so that Hans admitted he could barely control it using an entire furnace. The professor encouraged them to take advantage of the presence of a competent assistant with them and assigned them a new task to be submitted by next Thursday. The subject of the assignment was Fire Element Mana, Residual Charge, Yomryun, giving them the freedom to make anything they wanted as long as they adhered to this theme. Then he ordered them to move to the refinement hall and change their clothes in preparation for work. Hans saw this as a golden opportunity to get closer to the senior student Yom Song-hwa, so he stepped forward enthusiastically, greeting him. But Song-hwa interrupted him coldly with an icy look, ordering him to stay away from him, making Hans retreat defeated and feeling ashamed. In the meantime, Song-hwa was watching Lee Se-hoon, who was heading toward the exit, and called him by name as if he were waiting to speak with him in private. Song-hwa stopped his opponent before he left to ask him sharply what he knew about him. Se-hoon began his speech pointing out that the level of mastery of the residual fire spear technique is measured by the number of flames the user manages to maintain, citing the A-rank hero and head of the Yomhwa Gate, Lee Wan-ryong, who reached the level of 6 flames. Then he added as he walked away that Song-hwa had handled 3 flames with complete ease, and that if he had exerted his true effort, he would have been able to maintain 6 of them simultaneously. Song-hwa followed him with quick steps, asking him to explain what he meant by his words. But Sehun surprised him with a question that revealed a deep secret, hinting that Songhua had already reached the level of 7 flames, which struck the young man with a shock that paralyzed his movement. Sehun continued to reveal the full truth, adding that Songhua had suddenly lost the ability to control this number and that he had hidden this matter even from his great master. Sehun justified his knowledge by saying that he had some talent in dealing with fire and that he felt a flaw in Songhua's style while he was using the flame. He saw that Songhua was not correctly unleashing his latent potential but was allowing it to leak and be lost. Songhua asked him expectantly if he knew the cause of this flaw, and Sehun answered in the affirmative as he walked away. But he coldly added that he saw no reason to explain the matter to him, which sparked Songhua's indignation and confusion. Songhua surrendered to the reality and asked him to say what he wanted, so Sehun began presenting his conditions, asserting that any advice or help he provided would be for a fair price. His second condition was that Songhua must consult him on any matter that was difficult for him to decide. Songhua demanded that he say what he had before they reached the refinement hall. Songhua agreed to his terms, but he asked him to provide evidence proving the validity of his words. Later that day in the refinement workshop, students were whispering among themselves as they watched Sehun. They were surprised by his working method, which seemed random as he was, throwing materials directly into the furnace without concern, believing that this would cause the elemental mana to evaporate and be lost, and that his self-confidence made him ignore even checking the design. Sehun was mixing fire ore and dark ore in a ratio of 7:3. The students wondered how a top student could act with such amateurism, asserting that throwing materials this way would completely dissipate the elemental mana. With intense focus, Sehun began applying heat to the mixture until the elemental mana began to emerge from it. Then he used an advanced technique, controlling the flame and mana simultaneously to force the material to absorb elemental energy, a technique known as firepower displacement. The professor watched the scene with admiration, realizing that he was indeed using the firepower displacement technique and that this was the real reason behind Professor Kim In-cheol's acceptance of his work for the public auction. Sehun smiled confidently. He knew that what others saw was just a standard technique, but Songhua saw something completely different. He was presenting him with the evidence he requested, so Songhua had to keep his eyes open to see the truth. Sehun had reversed the characteristics of the two energies. He kept the fire mana, which expands outward, inside, and kept the dark mana, which penetrates inward, outside. In this way, the two opposite energies balanced each other, forming a perfect circle of harmonious energy. Songhua realized the truth at that moment. His second attribute, mana, the one he was told to get rid of because it conflicted with the flameflower spear, was the key. Songhua felt regret for his previous ignorance, admitting to himself that his level had declined starting from that day. Sehun interrupted his thoughts, offering him the final result. He had managed to complete the Black Lotus, but he didn't have enough power to maintain 6 of them, adding that 5 Black Lotuses are stronger than 7 ordinary ones. Songhua explained that the Flamegate sends instructors regularly to check on the progress of their heirs training abroad. Songhua explained that there is a strict rule. Any heir whose level drops below the 6th Lotus rank is immediately stripped of their position. Sehun suggested that he use his old method just once, but Songhua answered with a categorical refusal. He admitted that he was no longer able to control his dark attribute mana, which was exploding from him with a violent energy that could not be controlled. Sehun asked seriously when that instructor would arrive, and Songhua sighed, answering despairingly that he would arrive the next day. Sehun thought about the predicament facing the young man. If he lost his status as an heir, he would be expelled from the academy immediately, which pushed him to search for a way to make him useful within just one day. Sehun turned toward Songhua and asked him directly if he was ready to do anything to keep his position, and the young man answered with firm and unwavering confidence. Sehun smiled with relief, and a system window appeared before him announcing the extraction of a unique stone from Yom Songhua, a bright reddish-black stone of high rank and masterpiece quality, characterized by the presence of fire and dark mana together, causing resonance in the user's inner mana. With a confident smile, Sehun presented the glowing stone to Songhua, announcing that the first step in their plan was to change his weapon. Later, Songhua explained boastfully that this was the private training room of the Akalkov department, and that its use was limited to the top 100 students in the martial arts hall or the top 30 faculty members. But Sehun interrupted him boredly, asking him to stop bragging. Sehun announced that he would adjust some things in the place, and with a quick touch, he used a control panel to change the room's appearance. The room's appearance transformed into the traditional flame gate, so Sehun mockingly asked him if he felt nostalgic for his home, and Songhua replied that his master was the one who sent him this design and that he used it only rarely. Se-hun suggested they start by making training tools first, as he held a glowing red energy ball. Moments later, thanks to his ability to extract affinity, a system window appeared confirming the characteristics of the unique stone he extracted from Songhua. Se-hun presented Songhua with 2 short spears, which aroused the surprise of the latter, who had not even gotten used to using one short spear. But Se-hun explained to him that this dual design was much better for dealing with 2 different attributes at the same time. Se-hun gave him clear instructions. His left hand would form the lotus flower, while his right hand would release the dark mana. When Songhua asked if he should just release it, Se-hun confirmed that. As soon as Songhua tried to apply the instructions, the energy exploded violently and uncontrollably. Songhua asked in shock what had just happened, and Se-hun replied that he had unconsciously allowed the dark mana to leak into his left hand. Se-hun explained to him that the overlap of multiple mana attributes is normal, but his problem lay in the total chaos that caused the 2 energies to stumble, suggesting that the reason was he spent all his time trying to suppress the dark mana instead of merging it. Then he reassured him confidently that once he got used to using both powers together, reaching the 6 Lotus rank would become easy, and he gave him a piece of gear to continue his training. Songhua was impressed with the new gear he received. After 3 hours of intensive training, Songhua was fighting fiercely using the dual spears amidst a vortex of fire and dark energy. Se-hun watched him with admiration, noting his speed of adaptation, which he considered logical because this training style was designed by his future self. Se-hun decided to see the extent of his talent in the past, so he began analyzing every detail of his movements. He was scrutinizing breathing patterns, muscle movement, and center of gravity transitions, in addition to the mana waves that were circulating in his body and exploding from his palm. When Songhua asked him why he was staring, Se-hun simply replied that he was gathering data. He explained to him that he needed this data to build the weapon he would use, but he warned him not to raise his expectations, claiming it was just a side project for a class assignment, to which Songhua sarcastically replied that he didn't expect much from gear made by a first-year student. Se-hun changed the subject, asking Songhua why he was obsessed with maintaining his status as an heir. After a moment of silence, Songhua revealed the real reason. His master wanted him to become the sect leader after him. Songhua explained that as his disciple, he was simply carrying out his will, for his master was the S-rank hero and the first leader of the Flamegate, who adopted the orphaned Songhua as his son. Although rumors indicated that he had lost his influence after retiring due to an injury, as shown in his memorial photo. However, Se-hun realized through his look at their past together that this master and father possessed absolute control over the young man. Songhua interrupted his thoughts by asking him directly why he was helping him, and while Se-hun was thinking they should get along better, the system window showed that the affinity level between them had reached level 3. Se-hun replied that the reason was the 6 great demon worlds, those places swallowed by the pandemonium swamp and swarming with monsters. He revealed his plan to enter each of those worlds, and that to achieve this, he would need people to watch his back and materials to manufacture weapons. In a pragmatic tone, he explained that if Songhua became the next leader of the Flamegate, he would possess the skill and wealth necessary to support him, which Songhua considered purely materialistic thinking. Se-hun mockingly asked if he thought he was offering this help out of the goodness of his heart after their short meeting, adding seriously that nothing is free. Songhua acknowledged the truth of his words, remembering his condition that every help has its price. So he made a counteroffer, asking Se-hun to help him become the leader of the Flamegate, and in return, he would follow him to those 6 demon worlds. Se-hun remembered one of his past life memories, when Songhua asked him just to make the weapon, and he would take care of killing the demon god for him. Se-hun smiled and pulled out the reddish-black affinity stone, asking him if he was sure of his decision and had no regrets. With a demonic smile, Se-hun announced that he would make him the sect leader whether he wanted to or not. Then he activated the affinity seal, which made the stone glow in his hand. The next day, in the joint duel hall, a man wearing a traditional uniform received Songhua, greeting him with the title, Young Master. It was Kang Hyun-won, the instructor of the 7 rings in the Yomhwa sect. Songhua wondered about the identity of the men accompanying him, and Hyun-won explained that they were disciples personally chosen by the sect leader and that they were here to broaden their horizons through a duel between him and the young master. With a cunning smile, Hyun-won added that Songhua is the most skillful after the next sect leader. But Songhua interrupted him sharply, reminding them that the next sect leader had not yet been determined and demanded that he watch his words. So Hyun-won apologized, claiming he made a mistake for a moment. When he suggested starting to evaluate his skills, Songhua refused. Then he confidently announced that he would apply for the 7 rings promotion, which shocked Hyun-won, who thought to himself how this fool who knows nothing but training dares to covet the position of sect leader. Hyunwon recalled previous instructions from a mysterious figure, ordering him to deal with Songhua firmly if he challenged the Seven Rings, and promising to settle matters no matter what happened. Hyunwon reminded Songhua that a duel with an instructor starts from the Seven Rings onwards, and that he must consider the presence of Elder Yom, Jin Hyun in the main sect, but Songhua scolded him, saying he talked too much. Songhua provoked him by asking if he was afraid of being stripped of his position as an instructor, which sparked the anger of Hyunwon, who shouted for his spear to be brought and announced that this promotion would be conducted in the form of a range duel. The range duel was a direct competition of power, where the party with the stronger flame ring wins, and the condition for promotion was to achieve victory or a draw. Hyunwon announced the start of the duel, and Songhua took an offensive stance. Hyunwon mocked Songhua's dual spears, considering it a primitive style. Then he scolded him, questioning if he had forgotten the sect leader's words about suppressing the demonic power of the Dark Star, asserting that these vulgar flames would not be like the true flames. Songhua replied confidently that he would know the result when they faced each other, and Hyunwon threatened him that he would regret it. The fight broke out fiercely, as the two opponents exchanged powerful and successive blows. But Hyunwon was surprised by the strength of Songhua's attack. He felt that his flame dragon was not only being consumed, but was being torn apart. Songhua managed to shatter his opponent's spear, and Hyunwon fell to his knees in a state of shock and defeat. Songhua stood confidently holding his new weapon, describing his opponent's shattered weapon and style as primitive and vulgar. Sehun approached him, inwardly lamenting the good materials wasted in the shattered instructor's weapon, while Songhua wondered about the next step. Sehun explained to him that once the promotion ceremony was held soon, he would be officially recognized as an instructor in the Yomhua sect and its legitimate heir. Sehun turned toward him, inquiring about the way that would enable him to become the sect leader, and Songhua replied that there were two basic conditions to achieve that. Songhua detailed the two conditions, explaining that the first is reaching the 8 rings level, while the second is obtaining the approval and support of the majority of the sect's instructors. Sehun bent down to collect the fragments of the shattered weapons, while Songhua expressed his confidence in his ability to reach the 8 rings and gain the instructor's approval through duels. But he noted that future duels would not be just range duels that depend on pure power, so they would not be as easy as today's confrontation. Sehun replied calmly, asserting that it would not take long, which prompted Songhua to comment on how much he oversimplified things. So Sehun explained that he spoke with confidence because it was truly possible, citing the crushing victory Songhua achieved that day. Sehun reminded him with a cunning smile that he should instead worry about how to pay for this help from now on. Songhua agreed immediately, asking him to specify what he wanted, and pledging to provide anything he asked for, whether money or materials, as long as it was within reason. Songhua surprised him by saying that he had an additional request to make, which aroused Sehun's surprise at the rapid succession of his requests. Songhua contemplated the weapon in his hands, acknowledging its quality, but he pointed out that it was just a loan for a school project Sehun had prepared for his class as an assignment. Songhua smiled with satisfaction, wondering to himself in awe what kind of legendary spear Sehun would make for him next time if this powerful weapon had been made in just a few hours. With unusual playfulness, Songhua pointed his spear at Sehun's back as he walked away, demanding that he bring a more practical weapon next time, so Sehun scolded him without turning around, calling him a fool and asking him to put the weapon away so as not to hurt anyone, making Songhua stand dazed by his boldness and impudence. At that moment, a system window appeared before Sehun, announcing that the fate level with the target Yom Songhua had risen to level 2. Indicating that by increasing this level, the relationship between them had been established more deeply. Another window appeared detailing the nature of this relationship, which was classified as a deal, explaining that a fate stone would be generated every time a deal was made with the target, and that the stone's maturation speed increases as long as the deal is standing, noting that no stones have been generated yet. The scene then shifted to the crowded auction hall, where the audience gathered and the sounds of their conversations rose, filling the place in anticipation of the awaited event. The host took the stage and welcomed the audience, thanking them for their patience, then enthusiastically announced the start of the periodic auction dedicated to displaying the works of second-year students from the Smelting and Blacksmithing department. Sehun was sitting in the stands wearing elegant clothes based on Professor Kim In-cheol's advice on the importance of appearance, and beside him was Erika Inoue in her traditional dress, to notice to himself that the number of participants in the auction was larger than usual, concluding that the title of top student he holds has attracted all this attention. Sehun realized that being under the spotlight and the center of everyone's attention would make it difficult for anyone to devise overt schemes or try to hinder him directly. Sehun turned his gaze toward Vice Dean Michael, who was smiling wickedly, wondering in his heart about the nature of the plot he was devising to control the blacksmithing department, especially with the host's announcement that the theme of the auction was iron swords, and that 36 blades had been submitted, with the addition of a special and exceptional quality verification procedure this time. The host revealed a striped piece of cloth, explaining that it is known as Sugyeombo, which is woven from the smelted fur of an S-rank magical beast called the White Tiger, and is characterized by being as soft as silk but as tough as metal, and possesses immense resistance against cutting strikes. To prove this, one of the assistants directed a powerful sword strike toward the cloth, only for sparks to fly without the blade being able to penetrate it or cause any damage to it. In fact, the blade itself shattered from the intensity of the impact. So the host explained that this method easily reveals the swords whose makers sacrificed durability and toughness in order to increase cutting power, announcing that this cloth will be used in the auction to sort out and exclude defective products. The host announced the presentation of the first sword for the student Joseph, while Sehun watched the situation with interest, considering that this strict test was interesting and indicated their good preparation, then directed a whispered question to Erica, asking if she knew the real reason behind this intensified procedure. The characteristics of the magical white tiger were showcased, as it is wrongly believed that its body is just a solid shield, but the truth is more complex. Each part of its body has different characteristics, and its fur specifically is distinguished by its ability to mimic the sharpness of metal weapons, which means that no matter the quality of the weapon used against it, the fur absorbs its sharpness and destroys its durability. Erica realized the trap and wondered anxiously if the great white light sword that Sehun made was in a weak and vulnerable position, pointing out that swords that focus on cutting power often suffer from a severe weakness in durability. Sehun confirmed her conclusion with a calm smile, realizing that this procedure was a planned and exposed trap targeting him and Professor Kim In-cheol directly. If his sword shattered in front of everyone, not only would his reputation fall, but also the reputation of the professor who chose to display his work in this auction would collapse. The sound of the auction hammer echoed, announcing the sale of sword number 25 for 4 million won, while Sehun thought with absolute confidence that their plot would only succeed if he had truly failed to forge his sword perfectly, which is something he does not accept. Finally, the host announced that they had reached the last piece, sword number 36, and asked to start the quality verification procedures for the Great White Light Sword of the top student Lee Sehun. So the assistant raised the sword high in preparation for striking the cloth. The assistant struck the sword with all his might toward the impenetrable cloth, only for a bright and fierce white aura to emanate from the blade at the moment of impact, followed by a violent shockwave that tore through the air. The audience, including one of the professors or administrators, looked with total shock and amazement at the scene. The sword stood completely intact and shining with a pure blue and white brilliance, defying the characteristics of the destructive cloth, making everyone wonder in confusion and disbelief about what had just happened and how this weapon was able to withstand